All right, great. Why don't we get started? I'd like to call to order the March, what's today's date?
22nd.
March 22nd ACSD board meeting. Thank you all for attending. At this time, let's do introduction of board members. I'll call your name and then you can introduce yourself. Mary G.
Present. Oh, you want me to say my name? Mary Gill. I feel like I'm in school.
And also good to know you're present.
Okay.
Suzanne?
Dan Buck.
Chip Malcolm.
Victoria?
Victoria Jetty.
Jen?
Jen Newseeder.
Barb?
Barb Wilson.
Mary Heather?
Mary Heather Noble.
Lindsay?
Lindsay Hescock.
Lorraine?
Lorraine Morse, also present.
Amy?
Amy McGlashan.
Peter C?
Peter Conlon.
Henry?
Henry Carpenter, student representative.
Vicky?
Vicki Wells, Director of Student Services.
Caitlin?
Caitlin Steele, Director of Teaching and Learning.
Will?
Will Hatch, Technology Director.
And Peter B.
Peter Burrows, Superintendent.
Great, thank you all. Peter B., at this time, could you read the names of those individuals who are attending as attendees?
I sure can. Amy Mason, Brooke Rubright, Cheryl Cesario, Chris Kramer, Courtney Cron, Hugh McLaughlin, Jareen Doria, Laura McIntosh, Mar Harrison, MCTV, Ruth Bernstein, Samantha Eisenberger, Sarah Wesson, Tanya Scuteri, and Wendy Harlan.
Great, thank you all very much. Just as a point of clarification from a Zoom perspective, we've had a couple of questions with regards to the capacity of our Zoom meetings as they are set up like they are with panelists and attendees. There is a limit on the number of panelists, but there is an unlimited number with regards to the number of attendees that can join. And so we were not in jeopardy of an individual not being able to attend and hear the meeting. And when they wanted, if an attendee wanted to speak and was brought over during public comment, we would be able to arrange for that as well. So I just want to make sure folks are confident in our ability to, if 150 people wanted to join or 175 people wanted to join, this current system would allow for that. I just wanted to comment on that.
Yeah, the maximum is 500.
And if and when that becomes for us, then we'll cross that bridge when we get to it. So with that, I would like to open up the floor to public comment. To do so, if you could please raise your Zoom hand, and then Peter Burrows will bring you over to a panel as a panelist. If you could then state your full name and make your comments, and then we will bring you back over to attendee after those comments are done. So with that, Peter, I will turn it over to you.
Okay, Amy Mason.
You're on, there you go.
Sorry about that, Peter. You cut out exactly at the moment that you said my name. So here I am. Hi, I'm Amy Mason from Weybridge. I have a short statement of gratitude and one of invitation. So gratitude first. I have a 9th grader, a 7th grader, and a 4th grader in our system. The year has been hard for them in many ways and easier in ways that are really hard for other kids. But I expect years from now, they'll look back on pandemic school as a time when their teachers and administrators flexed and adapted and did everything they could to keep them safe and help them grow. I'm also grateful for the overall strength and vitality of the ACSD school system. We have an engaging new principal at the high school whose tricky first year looks to have been positive and successful. We've recently hired an exceptionally promising candidate to take the lead role at the middle school in a process that engaged educators, administrators, parents, and a great group of students. Our superintendent is a conscientious and highly respected leader who continues to build on the strengths of the district toward a vision for learning and inclusion. And the board has showed up time and again to do the hard work of governing within a statewide system that honestly at times can seem as if it's designed to torture each of them and all of us as constituents. We have a lot going for us in ACSD, and I'm choosing to focus on that. So here's my invitation, and it's to the whole community. For the challenges we face, how can we bring to these conversations an attitude of hope, encouragement, openness, and positivity? Can we focus on the strengths of ACSD and trust that each member of our school board functions with integrity and commitment to the district? I believe board members and central office administrators are doing their level best with their available tools. As a community member, I ask, how can we bring towns together and deepen the sense that we're all part of a whole? And where can we address grievances at the statewide level? As someone who's studied, led, and consulted for nonprofit boards, I'm really interested in what inputs might help this board to thrive as an entity. As a parent, I'm asking, how can we show up so the district and the middle school transition in particular has the community engagement and encouragement needed to succeed right now? I hope we can work together to find all these answers without the toxicity and distraction of an investigation, which I think is going to bring much greater cost to our community than just money and time. So instead of churning energy in an investigative process that focuses attention on history, can we look ahead instead and focus on asking great questions, on sharing thoughtful perspectives, and on engaging a democratic spirit that is hope-building and forward-looking? Personally, I'm shifting my energies away from mourning the missed opportunities of the facilities master process so far and looking toward prioritizing the health of the unified district as we look ahead. And I thank each and every one of you for your service.
Thank you.
Okay, Chris Kramer.
Hi, Peter. I didn't hear my name, but I assume you called me.
I did, yeah. Yep.
So I did write this time. I don't usually, but I want to start by just reading you all a few quotes from others that may give you an idea of what it means for me to be here today. As you all know, I ran for school board this past time around, even though I had called for Cornwall to be replaced with Bridport if a 4-school model was going to be voted on by February, as previously planned. I'm the co-chair of Friends of Cornwall School, and I lost a lot of support from Cornwall parents by doing that. Here are just a few examples. One Cornwall dad said, "You lost my vote when you announced your candidacy and advocated for closing Cornwall School in favor of keeping both Bridport and Shoreham open." A Cornwall mom told me, "If you really want to represent our community of Cornwall and be a voice that tries to extend equality throughout our county, then fight as hard as you can to keep open the Cornwall School and figure out how to lift up the schools of Bridport and Shoreham as well." And another dad demanded, short and simple, bluntly, "Are you still in support of closing Cornwall over another satellite school, yes or no?" I've had parents join FLCS meetings to confront me about my position and signs of mine taken down or never put up because parents couldn't agree with each other about whether to support me. In other words, I know this is a delicate issue, and I know it's not easy. I sacrificed support from the people who knew me best because I thought it was the right thing to do. But it wasn't easy. I tried to run and do what was right, but I didn't make it. So now I'm asking you all. The reason I took the stance that I did was that I had serious questions about the process, including how Cornwall had gotten back in the mix and how Bridport had been removed all at the last minute just before the scheduling of closure votes. I'm open to a range of options, but I did not want to be the squeaky wheel that contributed to the last minute closure of a neighboring school because of fears made very explicit in the records of my draft Cornwall withdrawal petition. Wherever we go, and however we get there, I want it to be through a transparent and open process. Some people have asked, why rehash this issue now? Given that there is a pause in the planning process and given how much else we have going on in terms of pandemic recovery and the MUMS transition, but the planning process and the underlying issues driving it are not going away. In fact, we will be dealing with it anyway at this very meeting as we sort through Ripton's withdrawal, which itself raises transparency questions around whether the district withheld information from the Agency of Education regarding supervisory union options and then publicly claimed voter ignorance of those options as a reason for not pursuing them. Sweeping transparency issues under the rug will only cement the feeling among those in the community who have concerns about the process that those concerns may never receive a fair hearing. On the other hand, as the spring comes in, vaccines are distributed, and we start seeing signs of hope, addressing this issue head on in a new and more direct way will help restore trust and bring hope to skeptical residents that maybe things can be different going forward. In other words, to go forward successfully, we need to openly acknowledge where we've been. I still have many questions about the process to date, but I've learned a lot from the records I received in response to my public records requests about recent developments. I learned that Brittany told Peter she would strategize with the transportation consultant to achieve a certain outcome, meaning an outcome that was predetermined before the transportation consultant was ever involved. I learned that Brittany said it would not be her first choice, implying that it was a choice made by Mary and Victoria, expressed in the meeting she and Peter had just had with them. In fact, in an email I did not include in the original documents, from about 2 weeks after that meeting, Victoria still did not even know the name of the transportation consultant or his company and had to ask Brittany what they were. I learned that Brittany and Peter agreed that their main reason to support the chosen outcome was to prevent a school from withdrawing, something that was never mentioned in any public meeting. I learned that high-level administrative staff, such as Vicky and Caitlin, raised significant questions about the impact of the recommended mix in terms of facilities, staffing, and educational outcomes, which never seemed to be answered. And I learned that Victoria's reaction to the Weybridge withdrawal petition was to tell Peter that Mary didn't think it would gain traction now that Cornwall was back in the mix. I know that Cornwall has some logic to it from a geographic standpoint. But when the superintendent and business manager both say they support it primarily for a different, more political reason, and that choice would lead to the closure of a small local school in our district's least affluent town, that town and the district as a whole, not to mention other board members, deserve to hear the full explanation up front before the decision is made. And when the chair and vice chair present a consultant's conclusions as independent and objective, when the records suggest they determined the outcome before he was ever involved and directed administrative staff to work with him to achieve it, it raises ethical and transparency questions that deserve a review. I also know that the Agency of Education has said they didn't see an issue here that met their guidelines for review, but they do not appear to have looked into it closely, given that they managed to misidentify the board chair after ostensibly reviewing documents that repeatedly highlighted coordination of administrative staff with the chair and vice chair. For comparison, while incidents that come before AOE are often quite serious, others that have met their standards in the past include drinking a single beer on a field trip, drawing on a student's face who fell asleep in class, and getting into an altercation with the opposing hockey coach. To be clear, none of those incidents led to fully revoking an educator's license, but were met instead with some lesser form of reprimand. It's a good example of how reviewing conduct does not always have to result in all or nothing consequences if a reasonable middle ground resolution can be found. Regardless, this is first and foremost a local board policy issue with respect to the Code of Conduct under Policy A5 and transparent governance under Policy A7. Both of those policies set conduct requirements for board members. This matter also raises questions under Policy A3, which includes requirements for conduct of the superintendent. Among those requirements, Policy A3 states the superintendent and board members always strive for open communication and trust. The superintendent works only for the board as a whole and not for any individual board member, close quote. However, it appears from the records that the superintendent may not have communicated openly with all board members about this matter, nor worked openly with the board as a whole. You all have the ability as a full board under Policy A9 to appoint any person or persons of your choosing to review this issue, whether internally or independently. I've provided via email a summary chart of these policies, related findings from the records, and important questions that these findings raise for board discussion. Tonight, at this meeting, when you get to the board policy agenda item, please do not let it become just a general review of board policy for new members and a refresher for those who are returning as a way of subtly deflecting any actual substantive discussion of this particular incident itself. If that happens, please have the courage to speak up and guide the discussion back to this specific topic as one that the community needs to see addressed. I know how hard it can be to speak up on a local board where everyone knows each other. It's very hard to feel like you're the odd one out. I've spent a lot of time in other contexts consulting to other policy boards, and one of the hardest challenges is always getting people to speak up about something that may be bothering them privately, but that they fear may cause them to be perceived as a troublemaker, especially if they don't feel confident in their grasp of all the facts. What I want to say here is that it's okay. You don't have to know every fact or have every question already answered to legitimately ask for an issue to be looked into. And you don't have to look down on someone as a human being in order to say what's on your mind, even if it may have to do with questions of conduct. You also don't have to throw the book at them if an issue really does emerge. There's a lot that can be done to address a real issue, which can be done in a measured and reasonable way. And you can still give full recognition to all the hard work and time that's gone into the process. But what I also want to say is that if you're wondering in the back of your mind whether there might really be an issue here, you're not alone. Not only do you have the support of many members of the community, but you're not even alone here on the board. I can count at least 6 different board members who've raised transparency as an issue in at least some form or another, whether it's the use of private email to conduct public business, or making sure teacher voices are really represented in the MUMS discussion, or feeling like decisions have been made before public meetings occur, or bemoaning the perception of a lack of transparency in the community, or just feeling like transparency is an issue overall that needs to be better addressed. Some of those concerns have been made in public and some to me in private. But you're not alone. It's not just you. It's hard to be the first one to speak up and feel like maybe you'll stick out. But if one person acknowledges the issue, that makes it easier for the next, and then you're not alone anymore. The community needs that. It's why you're here. It may be more than you bargained for, but you are the ones we are looking to. We have a situation that seems to at least raise questions that deserve looking into. Community needs to feel like the board cares enough about transparency to do the minimum and say they will look into it. That small step cannot possibly be too much to ask. I want to read one more quote from my father-in-law, congratulating me on getting Cornwall back into the mix. He wrote, "Katie sent the news about your success in having Cornwall not part of the closure. Now, it may be random. I doubt that. Who's made a difference besides you? Very proud and happy for you." I never wrote him back because I didn't want to take credit for something I felt might not be right. I stuck my neck out to do everything I could to make sure we did the right thing as a district. And I took a lot of heat for it. It's hard, I know. But you all are sitting there because we have faith in you to do the same. Please do your best to come through for us. Thank you.
Thank you. Next up, Peter.
Tanya Scuteri.
Hi, everyone.
My nose.
Hello, can you hear us?
Yep.
Okay, great. So it's actually my son who wants to make a comment. Go ahead.
My name is Owen Stricker, and I'm a third grader at Shum Elementary School. I would like to push back the start time from the start of the school day from 7:45 to 8:15. The pandemic has put a lot of stress on students and teachers, and it's hard when we have to wake up so early for school. Studies have shown that when students don't get enough sleep, it has a negative effect on learning. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Oh, and actually, sorry, I do have one comment on the webinar. So thank you for clarifying about the capacity. I just want to suggest that instead of webinars, these are hosted as a regular Zoom meeting. The host still has the ability to mute participants, so you don't have to worry about people making background noise, and it would allow us to see other community members and eliminate the need to read through that list at the beginning, and then of course missing anybody who enters the meeting after that list is read. So just a suggestion to go to the traditional Zoom meeting format. Thank you.
Thank you. Next up.
Laura McIntosh.
Hi, can you hear me? It doesn't look like you can see me, but can you hear me?
Can hear you, yep.
Okay, I'm not sure why you can't see me, but that might be good. My name is Laura McIntosh, Ripton community member, former Ripton school board member, and parent to a current MUM's 7th and 8th grader. I'm speaking today to express my great hope that the ACSD board will decide to contract with Ripton for SU services. Although I am very grateful that voters have supported Ripton in maintaining its own elementary school by forming its own district, we still need SU support. It seems to me that it would be mutually beneficial for us to remain connected and to work together in the best interests of our students. As the parent of older children, I am grateful that my children have had the opportunity to attend their small community elementary school, but I am just as grateful that they are now attending MUMS, and I look forward to my 8th grader attending MUHS in the fall. Thank you to the board for your role in making all of these schools great. Going forward, because Ripton Elementary students are likely to become tuition students of the ACSD for middle and high school, they will be and essentially are still part of the ACSD community. It makes sense for ACSD to be our supervisory union. Providing SU services would allow for continuity for our students, especially in the realm of special ed services and curriculum, which will benefit our students both in the elementary years, but also as they transition into the middle school. It will also benefit the educators who follow these children. It may allow for easier staffing, and it will certainly provide significant revenue to ACSD. There is benefit to everyone here. Financially, it would benefit the ACSD if you were to continue to provide SU services to Ripton. There has unfortunately been some political damage and hard feelings during the facilities master planning process and Ripton's withdrawal from the ACSD process, but we are now standing at a crossroads. We have opportunities to work together for the benefit of our students, and I think we would be foolish to pass them up. It's time to rebuild our bridges, figure out how Ripton can help the ACSD and how the ACSD can help Ripton to provide the best opportunities and services for our students. Allowing Ripton to contract with the ACSD would do just that. Thank you.
Thank you.
Cheryl Cesario.
Great, thanks. My comment tonight is a follow-up to a public comment I made at the February 22nd Policy Committee meeting. At that meeting, I asked the committee 3 questions, and those were regarding the information that was gathered in the public records request. First, I would say that the documents clearly illuminated the trust and transparency issues that have plagued this board. Based on the code of conduct, I asked the policy committee to consider 3 very specific questions. I was asked to send those in writing, which I did the next day on February 23rd, and I received no response. 8 days later, on March 3rd, I resent those questions, asking if they would be answered. And all I received was, "Thank you," and these will be added to our meeting notes. I'm sure you can understand the frustration there. So now I'm going to ask the board the same 3 questions. Feel free to write them down. 1, are these communications what our community should expect from our district and board? 2, are these communications in alignment with your code and what you stand for as leaders? And 3, should those involved continue to represent the parents, teachers, and children of this district? I hope this time you will carefully consider and answer these questions. Thank you.
I think we might have one more by phone. I'm going to see. Hello?
Hi,
Hi, is this Joanna?
it's Joanna.
Did you want to make a comment?
Yes. Thank you for figuring that out, Peter. I understand that the board will decide by vote tonight on how they wish to proceed regarding supervisory services for risk. I believe how this board votes tonight will greatly influence the State Board of Education's ultimate decision. Even though a vote is couched in politics, is it possible to put politics aside? I don't know. I do know, and I hope you are able to hear it, that the notion of Ripton withdrawing was never about the quality of an ACSD education. It was about protecting something important to us. We felt we had something valuable at risk, and we didn't feel represented in the process. Possibly, as Mary Heather suggested at one point, the pandemic amplified its importance. Possibly, the basic instinctual choice became more clear. If the facilities master plan pause had happened before January 12th of this year, it's likely we would all be on a different path. With the stewardship of our town and the education of our town kids before us, some Ripton community members made a move. Politics aside, the responsibility to educate our kids to the best of our ability is still before us. At this point, Ripton kids are still ACSD kids. As early as next month, the State Board of Education will hear the case for Ripton to withdraw. As they hear testimony, they will consider 2 options: reassigning Ripton to another SU or asking ACSD to provide FU services that Ripton pays for. The important thing to know about this is that before testimony, the likelihood of both options is the same. From the State Board's perspective, they do not favor one over the other. Donna Russo-Savage explained this equal likelihood at least 2 different times, and both times Superintendent Burrows was CC'd on those responses. Also to note, Ms. Russo-Savage did not suggest dissolution of ACSD. I am concerned that Superintendent Burrows' quote in the Addison Independent suggests he wants this board to vote to reassign Ripton to honor the voters' wishes. His comment is a little underhanded. I believe citizens in ACSD voted the way they did to respect Ripton's last-ditch effort to save their school with the understanding that Ripton might be asked to pay for SU services in the future, which, as I said earlier, before testimony, is as likely as reassignment. Moreover, it is not clear to me how continuing to provide SU services to Ripton would cost the district more or hurt other district kids. Asking ACSD to continue their services to Ripton is superficially perhaps a bit more complicated, at least initially, than just reassigning us to an existing SU. Is the board open to asking what the motivation is to deny the continuance of SU services that you would be compensated for Ripton students? Is it because of the discomfort of establishing another board? Is it the discomfort of setting a particular precedent? Do these discomforts outweigh the fact that, politics decide it's the right thing to do? There are so many questions. I feel like these next months will be filled with questions, and honestly, it's a little out of my comfort zone. But I ask again, is it possible to put politics aside? Maybe we have been in a political battle about this for too long, but maybe not. Is it possible to consider this as an invitation to collaborate and build a new way forward for Ripon children who are also ACSD's children? Thank you.
Thank you. Anyone else, Peter?
Nope, that's it.
Great. As always, thank you all very much for taking the time and sharing your thoughts. Greatly appreciated. As a change of agenda item, we have to move the student coalition presentation to another meeting. Is that correct, Peter? Students have asked to postpone that to another meeting. And so we will honor that request and do that. And I believe now we are up to approving the minutes, and this motion to approve minutes is going to be made with a motion to approve minutes with adjustments to those minutes, because within the minutes there was a misaccurate representation of a vote, and so that's going to be corrected. Correct, Suzanne? Yeah. So the motion would be to approve the minutes with the corrected statement regarding vice chair board vote.
I'll make the motion.
Thanks, Jen. Could I have a second? Second by Mary Gill. Any discussion or comments?
What is the corrected number?
The corrected number is, Victoria, do you have the corrected number, or Jen?
11
I thought
to 2.
I thought it was 11 to 2, so I'd asked Suzanne in a private email, this didn't look right to me. Are you sure this was right? So I'd asked her to look into it. So Victoria, you confirmed it was 11 to 2?
Yeah, I rewatched the video because my memory was that as well. So when I saw the other, I double checked.
Thank you.
Thank you for correcting that. I looked at that number and I just didn't think it was correct either, but.
Great. Any other discussions? All those in favor? Raise your hand. Keep it up. Great. All those opposed, please raise your hand. Great. So moved. Next on the agenda is to approve the bills. Chip?
There was one set of bills that were read by Victoria and I on 3/15/21 for a total of, out of the general account, total of $501,145.03. All the bills were reviewed, and I make a motion that we pay those bills.
Second.
Any discussion? All those in favor, please raise your hand so we can see it. All those in favor? Great. Any opposed, please raise your hand. Great. Thank you. So moved. Just from a point of order perspective, we're going to try to really see raised hands and make sure that we can all clearly see when they are raised for approval to approve, and clearly see when they are raised to say no, and clearly see anyone who's raising their hands to abstain. So I'm going to pause a little bit for each of those requests just to make sure that they are appropriately noticed. Thank you. Report of the superintendent. Peter.
Thank you. So just a kind of a quick update on COVID recovery and what's happening with that. So I've shared over the last month or so, month and a half, the AOE has been putting together a recovery planning process to guide the work of the district. to guide the work of the entire state as we look at coming out of the pandemic and start putting structures in place, start thinking about how we're going to use our ESSER funds, start to really think about how are we going to do education differently to both respond to what we've learned over the last year as we've departed from the norm, as we've been ripped away from our normal processes and procedures that we're so used to in education, and also work to look at what every single student has both gained in the last year and lost, and be able to be flexible and adaptable. So we are, this week, we're finalizing our teams that are going to be making up the entire recovery planning process. We have a literacy team. We'll have a student services team. These are planning teams. They're not really large representative teams, involving teachers and everything else. Right now, they're just planning teams, admin planning teams, and these teams will then work to engage the entire district in this work. So they're kind of the organizing body. So literacy, student services, social emotional learning, mental health, engagement and attendance, and summer programming. So we're, as those groups stand up this week, next week, we'll be working towards the goal of having this entire plan completed by June 1st. I think I stated this in our last board meeting that doing the work that the state is requiring of us is not hard to do. What we want to do is make sure what we're doing and building is right for us and it works within our system. So that's our main focus right now. I mentioned ESSER funds, so we are in the kind of final stages of figuring out what kinds of positions we might need, additional positions. These would be grant funded positions that would support the work of these individual planning groups, looking at literacy, looking at social emotional wellness, and leading that work and putting more intention into that work in the coming year to be able to both meet immediate need for students, but also make changes to our system that are more durable and more lasting and continue on as we also engage the work of our system of services, all of our student supports that we've been working on over the last 2 years. We've given lots of updates here about that work. It's work that Vicki Wells led. And so we're taking this work and it's also coming at I think a good time for us in terms of getting that work firmly embedded within ACSD. The other kind of big thing that I wanted to talk about, and I've been sharing updates weekly, is our secondary return to in-person. So a lot of people are talking about this. It's a national conversation. And we are, we're currently, both moms and MUHS principals have been looking at their buildings, they're measuring, they're looking at what would that 3 feet distance mean in classrooms. So we're preparing for what we think will be a change in guidance from the state. We haven't heard anything yet from the state. I expect that in the next week or so, we probably will get updated guidance. So still in Vermont, the physical distancing within a classroom is still set at 6 feet. So once that changes, I think we'll probably, and I think this is going to happen statewide, systems are going to be looking at, so can we accommodate this new guidance and how does it work? So we're right now in the process of, again, looking at how it functions. We're also looking at, thinking about flexibility and how we can provide flexibility at the same time, realizing that, currently our secondary teachers are teaching both remote and in person. So they're juggling both right now. So with a shift to in-person, we're probably would be looking at 4 days as opposed to 5 to allow them to continue to do that. But we also have to think about, as we make that shift, can we accommodate more students in that or not? And what does that look like? So we have some, we have some planning and thinking to do to figure out how all the pieces fit together. But we're working on it. We're kind of getting to a position of being prepared if the guidance does change, and then we'll kind of come out with more information and timeline and all that.
Any questions for Peter? Peter C?
Thanks. I used my Zoom hand. I don't know what works better, Zoom or physical
Zoom
hand.
hand's great.
Okay. So 2 questions. One, just curious, I think you had a vaccination clinic for school employees. Just curious to know how that worked out, what percentage are vaccinated at this point. And 2, you had mentioned earlier that summer learning might be a bit of a challenge in that you've got a lot of teachers who are feeling the real need to take the summer off, understandably. And if you could comment on that, that'd be great. Thank you.
Yeah. So vaccinations went really well. I think most of our staff were either vaccinated on Tuesday or had gone through Walgreens or Kinney previously. So I think between the vaccination clinic and Walgreens and Kinney, we were probably in the 90 percentile having been vaccinated. We don't have that data to say this person's been vaccinated or not, but I think given the AOE information I've gotten over the last week with further openings in places throughout the state, I think we're probably there in terms of vaccination. Some are still awaiting a second shot right now. I think by the end of April break, we should be all together there. And then, what was the second question?
Summer learning.
Summer learning, yeah. So that's something the team, I mentioned the teams that we're putting together. That summer programming team is going to be looking at how do we build programming for students. Again, this is going to be voluntary, right? We're not going to require attendance, and can't require attendance. But we do want to provide those opportunities. So I think we're going to be looking not just at ACSD, but we're going to be looking at partners throughout the community to support that. So I think it's going to be, I imagine that a lot of partners in the community are wondering, well, where are we going to be at with COVID in the summer? Are we going to run our full camp or not? Are we going to run this program or not? So we're going to be looking at both our ESSER funding, our own staff and staff that are willing and able to engage during summer, and then we're going to have to put all those pieces together. But it's interesting. I mean, I'm thinking about everyone in our system, from students to staff and community, and we both have this real need to provide more service for students because they've been not getting as much and not being as connected. At the same time, we've got some who have been working really hard. They've been feeling that isolation and challenge too, but they're also, I think the system as a whole is really fatigued. So like you said, I think it's trying to find the kind of the spot and again, leaning on people outside of the school system too. I think that team will be both in and out of ACSD.
Barb, then Mary.
Great, thank you so much. It's so exciting to hear about the teachers being vaccinated. That was going to be my question that Peter Conlon asked, one of my questions. The other question I had, kind of as a follow-up on bringing all the kids back at MUMS and the high school, does that require that every student actually needs to do in-person? I could imagine there's students that maybe are a little more vulnerable or maybe have family members that are vulnerable that may still want to do remote. So that was one question. And the second question is, over the summer program, is there an involvement maybe with the students as to what kind of programs at the high school level? I know I listened to Senator Sanders' town hall and ideas like even just having college visits that they missed out on, those kinds of things where it may not be traditional instruction, but it would then, help them take advantage of things that they missed out on.
So, so relative to the question about remote, I think we're fairly committed, or we are committed to continuing that through this year. Interestingly, remote wasn't one of the requirements at the beginning of the year from the state, but I believe almost every school system did offer a remote option, and some have carried that remote program themselves. Some have hired VTVLC, Vermont Learning, to do that. Those are kind of the two ways that people approached it. But yeah, we're not, what I was mentioning in terms of making a transition is thinking about the capacity that teachers have to carry additional students remotely or not. So we're not talking about discontinuing students that are currently remote. Yeah. Yeah, and the second part about kind of hearing from students about what they want, I think is a great idea. And I think that's something that that group will be doing as they start to think about and plan for the summer. Who better to ask than students in terms of what they want to do and the kinds of things they want to kind of connect about. And I think historically, when we think about the summer, we think about summer school. And I think Henry may have mentioned this in our last meeting, that students maybe didn't want to just go to summer school. So I don't think we're approaching this as let's do a lot more summer school. We're thinking of this kind of, I think, differently in terms of probably as a primary lens. And again, this group is just getting going, but my own bias here is bringing a more of a social and emotional wellness lens to it as the first kind of priority, academic as well, but definitely providing us a place for connection for kids.
Excellent. Thank you so much.
Yeah.
Mary Gill?
Yes, I wanted to ask also, you had mentioned literacy, social emotional learning, and student services. You didn't mention math. Is that just, you forgot to mention that? Or I would hope that they'd be getting some math as well as literacy. So
we've been doing a lot of math work this spring.
Okay.
We didn't, given what we have in place and the work that we're planning for 21-22, we didn't feel like right now we need to put a math group together. It doesn't mean we're not planning for math or thinking about math. It's just that that's not one of our planning groups to kick into the start of the kind of like summer into fall. But
okay.
that planning and that we've been doing a lot of curriculum work this spring on math to be prepared for the fall.
Okay. My other question is, are there any parents involved in the planning teams?
So there will be. As I was mentioning, these groups are more administrative groups just to organize how all of that functions, and then once they kind of figure out what the work is, that's where then it'll spread to students. There aren't any teachers on this yet either. It's just right now it's just administrators kind of trying to piece together what is the work, and then it's going to include many.
Okay. Thank you.
Yeah.
Mary Heather, then Chip.
Thanks. Peter, I'm wondering if you could just refresh our memory about the ESSER funding and just the longevity of it. I know it's a relatively new thing, and is this sort of multi-year, or when does that kick in? And if you could just educate us, bring us back.
It's starting this summer. It's kind of going through about 2 years, and it's the numbers are increasing as we, each ESSER amount has been increasing. So our first amount is around 400. The second amount is 1.5, I believe, isn't it? And then the third amount, I think, is going to be more than the 1.5, but I don't think we have the exact number yet for that. So I don't want to quote that ESSER 3 number.
Great.
So it provides, it's an incredible influx. We also have to figure out are we going to be dealing at all with supplement supplant? We want to invest in things that are not just going to be here, gone tomorrow, and leave a big gap. So we want to think about this as really helping to infuse, support students that need additional, help right now. But we also want, in terms of the system, we want it to be productive. We don't want to create this cliff where we build all these services and then it just drops off in 2 years. And we're we didn't design for that. So we really are trying to be thoughtful around the design of the spending so that we can, it helps us as opposed to just, it's a quick kind of here today, gone tomorrow.
One question that came up, this is obviously a big national issue. I mean, even 60 Minutes did their big thing the other night, which some of us watched. And I guess there's so many different ways to try to attack it. But, as I was thinking, even the way of repeating a year, I mean, there are quite a few children in this community that went away to prep school or did whatever for many different reasons who repeated a year to bring them up to speed to potentially, I guess, for where they would be in that class. I'm not advocating it, but it seems like, there are some children that, are probably so left out of this that repeating a year might be best. Maybe that's terribly awkward and it's not going to work, but it seems like there's so many different ways that we can approach this, not just summer. I don't know. It's frightening to me to think of how we assess it, each child, and how we, as a district or a teacher or administrator, act on it. It's sort of overwhelming, actually, I think.
Yeah, I mean, I think you've summed it up well. Yeah, I agree. The summer is for some, not all. Right. So we're not going to build into the summer. We're not going to build things that every student had to get to be able to proceed forward. The challenge, like you're mentioning, is, and I think I've referenced this once before, is we have to think differently about grades and content going into next year because students are coming back. And again, we're making some assumptions, right, about students coming back, and we don't yet know some of the realities we'll be facing in September. But given our current trajectory and our current trend, we feel like we'll be mostly back, right? Part of the recovery planning is thinking about how do we provide intervention and support for students that have had varied experience over the last year. And they may not have followed the typical track that they followed for the previous 8 that they were in school. So for the previous 8, they may have gone in a certain direction and there was some consistency. In this last year, they may have done leaps and bounds positively in some way on remote or hybrid, but lost in other ways that they're normally kind of strong. And so I think that's the reality that we're going to be facing. So I don't think it's necessarily, even if you held every student back a grade, you're still in that same situation. It's just a different number, right? So that is the challenge. I mean, I think you articulated it really well.
Victoria?
I think you pretty much, my question was building on CHIPS, because I had a conversation with a teacher and I sort of made the assumption that some students who either, especially at the secondary level, who either have been no-shows for whatever reason this year, I said, what % of students do you think will be repeating the year? And the teacher sort of said, oh, well, generally they don't do that. And I thought, it never struck me that would be sort of pedagogically something that we don't do. I wondered maybe if Caitlin could speak a little more to that if you have a situation where a kid has, basically not been in attendance, are you gonna have them just repeat the year?
I'm not sure that I'm exactly the right person to answer this question. We definitely handle it differently at the elementary and middle level versus the secondary level. I mean, the high school level where students earn credits or don't, right? And so they earn credits based on demonstrating proficiency as measured on our MYP rubrics or, passing classes. So students could certainly repeat classes that they don't pass. At the PYP, the elementary and the middle level, we don't generally retain students. Rather, we try to move them along with their age-alike peers and continue to support them. At this point this year, we're expecting more diversity in students learning than normal. Diversity in learning strengths isn't strange, it's very normal. We're just expecting more diversity than we have experienced before, and we're expecting it to be more unpredictable than it has been before. So I would say we're really early in our process of collecting that baseline data for our COVID recovery. We have a team, the Agency of Education is running a series of data literacy trainings, and we have a team attending that. It's meant to inform our COVID recovery process and move in line with that. So we'll really be doing a deep dive, both in terms of collecting that baseline data to design our responses, and then also to reflect on the efficacy of our processes going forward. I don't know, Peter and Vicki, did you want to add anything to that?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's just not something, the nation as a whole emerged out of holding students back, so to speak, a long time ago. And a lot of the research was around the impact kind of socially and emotionally, and that it's instead of holding students back, which creates a stigma, which then creates a belief system, and there are all sorts of kind of reverberations out of that, that the approach that generally works, this isn't always true, like sometimes it is a fit for a student, and it occasionally does happen, so it's not like it never happens, but in the way that we're talking about right now, I don't think that would be a good place to go as a first step.
Thanks.
Barb?
Hi, sorry. Talking about the ESSER funding, is there, hopefully there will be enough funding as well as resources that are available, which is maybe going to be the bigger problem, where we can provide more one-on-one or in the specific areas that the student may need, or a group of students may need, to allow them then to stay with their peers and to make up for some of the lost time. Do you see that being, part of what's in the toolkit for doing?
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, increasing intervention, increased kind of one-on-one or group support. Yeah, definitely. Our biggest challenge will be hiring people.
That's what I would guess. Everybody's needing these resources, right?
Yep.
Thank you.
Lindsay?
Can you hear me okay?
Yep.
Thank you. When you were saying the names of the planning teams, did I hear social emotional learning and mental health?
Yeah.
Is mental health a separate planning team focus?
So it's going to be part of the same team. They're different things, but that team is going to look at that as a whole and then figure out what the work is. I think as the work happens within social emotional learning and mental health, that will bifurcate.
What do we know about our community partners? And I know we do a lot with CSAC, and is that at the administrative planning level where we identify other resources that we might be able to work together on some of these target areas?
Yeah, I mean, I think it will start with that planning group, but as that planning group figures out what the work is and thinks about which stakeholders we need to engage, that would include all those different agencies. And we're connected right now. Vicki attends LIT, which is a regional group of these different services. CSAC is there and others are there. So that's one of the ways that we're currently connected, that we would be leaning on those relationships and others to make the connections and move forward.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah.
Great. Anything else on this, Peter?
No.
Super. Thank you. So next up on the agenda is a discussion with regards to board operations and policy practice. I know that we have received a myriad of emails on the topic as it pertains specifically to the facilities master plan. I also am aware that we have continued to receive public comment during our board meetings on the topic with regards to the facilities master plan and our policies, as well as statements with regards to the board's ability to be transparent in our process. For this discussion, I'm going to highlight a couple of things with regards to level setting, so that we're hopefully coming to this with some common knowledge before we move forward in the discussion. Given the emails that have been shared and the concerns that have been expressed, I'll then also ask Victoria to make a statement, and then any other board member that wishes to make a statement specific to this topic. Once that is been made, then we're going to open it up for discussion and questions and things like that. So just to kind of start this off, I think it's important that we be reminded of a few board operating principles as we move into this. First and foremost, we are governed by public meeting law. And it is a responsibility of all board members to understand what public meeting law means and to operate under the requirements of those laws. And again, to reiterate, at no time has there been a belief statement that has been shared by any agency, nor by individuals who have lodged complaints that there was a belief that public meeting law had been violated. And so what that means is that we have been operating under law as we are supposed to be operating. And there has been no statement or proof otherwise. And I think that that's a very important component as we enter into these conversations. It's also important so that folks understand the role of committees and how committees work from a board perspective, and that those committees are also still under public meeting law requirements. As we have moved into COVID, the way that our committee meetings have happened is a little bit different because of Zoom. Usually our committee meetings would happen right before board meetings. We would all go into different areas of wherever our board meetings would be held, and we would conduct our committee meetings. As a result of COVID and going to Zoom meetings, there was additional scheduling, and they didn't always happen right before a board meeting. We were then asked to record them, which we did. But again, there has not been any statement that is said to believe that those committee meetings have violated public meeting law. In no way have they, no evidence has been produced to suggest otherwise. It's also important to remember that the work of the committees they've been established to move the work of the board forward. And that these committees are created in a way and so that they are given specific purview with regards to the domains of the essential work of the board as established by the Vermont Board, the State Board of Education, the Vermont Board Association. And it's that work of boards and those domains that our committees support. And it, from a practical perspective, would be inefficient and almost impossible for all of the stuff that has to get done to be done at the board level. And so the committees are then charged with specific activities to move that work forward. And then they are required to report back to the full board when action needs to be taken as a full board or when information or update needs to be shared. And so that just reminds folks of how that committee works. Within a committee, there could be a request or a requirement that has been asked for someone on the committee to move work forward, to reach out to someone and get feedback, to check in with an individual and get an understanding. But again, to move that work forward and then report back to the committee, and then the committee would report back to the board. And again, at no time has there been a belief that public meeting law has been violated in our work of committees. Our board policies, as we have shared and have been quoted, speak much to how we do our work. The tone and manner and the commitment, the ethical nature, the transparency and the trustworthiness that our community puts into us as we do this work. There, we have received accusations that members of the board, including myself, have been acting unfaithfully, or have been acting in a non-transparent way, or have been unethical in our practices. In some instances, using words like lack of transparency to be associated with lying or presenting information or not presenting information that should have been. And it's there where there have been questions that have been raised with regards to our board policies. There has also been comment with regards to communication between board members. Again, I want to remind folks that from a legal perspective, we are allowed to speak to one another. It's a small community. We speak to our neighbors. We run into each other at Shaw's. We see each other on the playing fields, and we are allowed to do that. Again, public meeting law requires that action and formal discussion be taken in public meeting settings. And again, there has been no accusation that public meeting laws have been violated. I'd also like to talk a little bit about debate and disagreement, which has been raised. We're a board of 13 individuals and a superintendent and representatives here also from our leadership staff. And we are all opinionated and come to this with perspective and work. And there will be times when we disagree. There'll be times when those disagreements are shared and aired, and we will wonder what other individuals are thinking or the perspectives that they have, and we'll question those thoughts and those intentions. It's called debate. It's called disagreement. And it's what we've been put in these chairs to do. And the way that we do it in a very civil and respectful way, it's been my experience on this board over the past few years that we do it better than most boards, to be quite honest. And I have been amazed and grateful for the tremendous respect that everyone on this board has shown one another, the perspectives that we bring, the way in which we go about doing our work and sharing our information. Some tend to be a little shyer, some tend to be a little bit more vocal, and it's all good. And that's how we go about doing our work. Disagreement does not mean that there's anything nefarious. It doesn't mean that there's a lack of transparency. It just means that we disagree, and that's okay. The other thing that we wanted to comment on with regards to tone, it is part, and it's language that is in our board policies with regards to how we interact with one another, the respect and the intention that we bring to that work, and an underlying assumption that we believe that we are all doing this work with honest intentions. It's probably here where I have been challenged the most to think that there is a belief that anyone sits in these chairs that's coming to this work that is trying to subvert or do work in a way that doesn't live up to the mission and the values of ACSD. I have yet to see that. I can't imagine that to be the case. And then the other comments that we wanted to make with regards to public engagement and the effect of that. It's been tough. It's been really tough given our Zoom environment, I think, to do this in a way that seems and feels authentic. Having a Zoom meeting like this, I also think is very difficult. But it's the cards that we've been dealt with. And I think all of you have done an amazing job to make that work. We have consistently been asked during the facilities master plan to listen more, to hear what other people are saying. We have tried through a myriad of community engagement processes to do just that. And then we finally, prior to COVID really shutting us down, started to think about how could we do that differently. And we enacted the porch conversations as part of the facilities master plan. And all of that was to do what we had been asked by our community members to do, was to listen, was to hear more. And as a result of that listening, as a result of interaction with our community members, it must be understood and expected that some positions would change. That ideas, as we learned more and as we continue to reflect and as we continue to reach out, as we continue to get inputs in this very long process, that preconceived notions could be altered, that ideas could change, that solutions could be morphed because we were going through a process. That's what community engagement should be. There shouldn't be a preconceived determination or preconceived idea of what is right, which is exactly why we have all seen the evolution of this work. because we did exactly what we were being asked to do, and that was to listen. And then finally, I think there's opportunity for us to continue to get better. Our committees, our board policies, our practice, they had been written a couple of years ago, and we're going to conduct a training and work with folks to keep getting better in our committee work and to keep understanding how in today's environment do we do the work on behalf of these kids. And so I just wanted to remind folks as we go into this, the important nature of the public meeting laws and requirements of that. But I also wanted it to be really clear that simply by saying or using words like the lack of transparency or the community feels, I want us to be careful in using those broad terms. The community has definitely spoken very loudly this past voting time with the passing of our school budget in a tremendous way. That is what the community has shared. That is a way that the community can demonstrate, do they have faith in this board? Do they have faith in the district? And do they have faith in leadership? And from my perspective, the community spoke very loudly with regards to that vote. I also believe that we all have to remember who we represent, and that is every kid in ACSD, every one of them, regardless of where we go to bed at night, regardless to the town that we vote in, regardless to our post office, we represent every single one of them. And that will be the hardest thing that we will continue to be asked to do. And I have to say, over the past couple of years, it has been an honor to watch all of you try to do that in tremendous, tremendous challenging times. But I am 100% confident that we have all done that without for a moment thinking that we were trying to get something over on somebody, or not be honest in the presentation of information, or not be honest in the way that we shared ideas, or tried to coerce a decision so that it was better for one group and not for another. Not once have I ever seen that. And so with that, I'd like to turn it over to Victoria to see if she has any other comments.
Thank you, Mary. As Mary has explained, the way we operate and get work done as a board is through committees. Each committee has a scope of work that has been agreed upon by the full board. Committees are then tasked to do their work and bring information, recommendation, suggestions, and questions back to the board for deliberation, clarity, and decision. Members of this board are allowed to speak to one another about board matters, individually, by phone, Zoom, or in the aisles of Shaw's. There is no rule against this, and in fact, as in the course of any work, it is helpful to gauge the thinking of board members and get their feedback. This part of the process has either been misunderstood or intentionally disregarded by a few of our constituents. Through a labor-intensive public records request, one individual believes that they have pieced together evidence of wrongdoing and behavior counter to board policy. We are here to discuss and clarify how we operate as a board, and in so doing, put an end to the accusations that there were some misdeeds perpetrated by me, Mary, and Peter Burrows in the course of the board's work on the facilities master plan. Specifically, we are being accused of lying and acting unethically in regards to the decision to look at a 4-school model over a 3-school model. Members of this board have been sent emails questioning their intent while considering the board's decision to look at 4 schools. Valuable time and money is being spent on these misguided accusations that should be allocated to getting our secondary students back in the buildings, figuring out the extent of learning loss during the pandemic, and getting a pulse on the social, emotional well-being of our kids. Not to mention welcoming a new principal at MUMS and preparing for 6th grade to move, while also celebrating the class of 2021. When first engaging Truex Collins to do a facilities study, we made clear that this would be one piece of the facilities master plan puzzle. In short, if it were the only piece, we would be building a single elementary school for our district and moving on. Instead, the board asked Truex to just think about the existing buildings. They determined that our student body would physically fit within 3 schools. Next, we asked our administrators to look at how we would staff 3 or 4 schools and if we could deliver the needed services. Again, it was determined that the most efficient staffing would be in 3 schools. During this time, some questions were raised by the board and community about how tightly we would fit and if there was indeed enough room for special services, etc. Would there be room for more students if we were to see a population increase? Transportation was an issue about which there was a lot of concern. Did it make sense from an after-school activity perspective to have more kids further from Middlebury? How long is too long on a bus? We heard about the importance to some of our small communities in having a small school to choose from, even if their home school were to close. We heard concern from Middlebury residents about Mary Hogan becoming too big. We were hopeful that the transportation study results would help reveal if we could keep bus times palatable at under an hour and get the kind of socioeconomic mix we were hoping for. The transportation study design principles were to keep ride times below an hour, create appropriate system and school capacity, support our objectives of creating diverse learning communities, and move as few students as possible. The models the transportation consultant considered included 3 schools, Mary Hogan, Bridport, Salisbury, as well as 2 4-school models of Mary Hogan, Bridport, Cornwall, Salisbury, and Mary Hogan, Cornwall, Salisbury, Shoreham. Tim's initial findings were summarized as the 3-school model offering the least flexibility for transportation. Of the 2 4-school models, Mary Hogan, Cornwall, Salisbury, and Shoreham were said to provide the most flexibility, greater geographic balance, and would mitigate negative transportation impacts. With all of the questions and Tim's preliminary analysis, I grew increasingly uncomfortable with the idea of 3 schools because it would throw so many in our small towns in turmoil, might not be doable from a transportation perspective, wouldn't provide a smaller school option for all families who wanted one, logistically would make after-school programming more difficult for many families. I thought to myself that I would rather have a successful consolidation into 4 schools than push our district too hard and fail at passing a 3-school model. At this time, I reached out to members of the facilities committee, Mary Gill because of her long history in all of our schools, my neighbor and board member Peg Martin, as well as various community members to get their thoughts about how a 4-school model that included Cornwall, Salisbury, Shoreham, and Mary Hogan would feel. At no time did I lobby, cajole, or coerce anyone. I was simply sharing my thoughts and asking for feedback. I wanted to make sure that I wasn't crazy in my thinking and that this turn in the process made sense. Overwhelmingly, the people I spoke with were in favor of looking into the 4-school model and expressed relief at how much better it felt. As we awaited a more in-depth analysis from the transportation consultant, focus turned to the timeline and ultimately how we didn't have the capacity with everything else going on to devote adequate resources to finishing the rough draft of the facilities master plan on schedule. The communications committee first agreed to a pause and in the process, followed by the full board. We have paused mid-process and will presumably pick up with the final recommendation from Tim when we restart. Those who feel that there was activity that broke board policy in all of this cite the fact that some of our administrators texted during one meeting about their surprise at the course shift. I was not surprised at all when I read their words. Brittany's job was to look after this district from a financial perspective. Is the 4-school model the most financially sound? No. Vicki had worked hard on her staffing analysis and recommended 3 schools as the most efficient, so her surprise that we were planning to now look at 4 schools is not shocking. Both of these administrators have been asked to model in the most efficient and financially responsible way. That meeting was the first time that the administration as a whole had heard us discuss opening the analysis to include 4 schools. I would have been surprised too. Do I wish that they expressed their concerns so that we could have discussed it in greater depth at that meeting, why we wanted to look at 4 schools? Yes. Do I think that their surprise is indicative of something sinister, as Chris Kramer would allege? No. I think that this is a district and a board engaging in the difficult work of figuring out how to provide a quality education to all students in an environment of increasing costs and decreasing enrollment. Thank you.
Prior to opening it up to any questions, are there any other statements that want to be made? Great. So that we can kind of keep this.
I think Mary Gill had her hand up.
Yeah, no, we're going to go to Q&A now. Just keep the question process kind of efficient. If you do have a comment, please raise your Zoom hand so that I'll be able to see that in the queue. We'll then work to get through all of the questions. Please limit your questions to one so that we can get all through these, and then we'll go through them, and we'll, if we have time, to get back to a second round of questioning. So with
Mary,
that,
I think some of these are, I think some people have their hands up for statements.
Yeah.
oh, okay, great.
Statement.
Great. If you do have your hand up for statements, then keep your Zoom hand up. If you have your hand up for questions, if you could just put your Zoom hand down for a moment. Great. Mary Gill.
Thank you. When Victoria told me, or we discussed the idea of looking at other models besides this 3-school, I was refreshed by that, because it meant that we were looking beyond just a prescribed model that was the most economically feasible. Knowing how important it is for the smaller communities or the communities outside of Middlebury to maintain their small school atmosphere, I felt like this is refreshing because it's opening up other possibilities. I never felt like the decision had been made beforehand. I felt it was just looking at brainstorming and many options. I thought it was a way to make that happen. So I concur completely with what Victoria just said. In terms of the policy committee, I know we've had a number of people who have wanted us to take on writing or proposing new policies. The policy committee has been very busy this year enacting a number of required policies that have been put before us. And currently we have 5 on the queue right now to bring to the school board. And we have not been able to even have those discussions at the school board because of all other things that have come up. So when people ask us to write a policy, the policies that we take on as a policy committee are at the direction of the board or the Vermont School Board Association, which makes, they look at what the required policies are by law. And that's what we have done. So if people think we're not listening to them, we are, but we have a full agenda of items already on our committee. Thank you.
Thank you. Peter Conlon.
Thanks. I think we need to take a look at whether we should be spending a lot of time messing with or seeing how the policy applies to what has gone on. Because what I feel we're dealing with here is really one person's conspiracy theory. I mean, if you go back and look at the letter that was sent to us and the number of times it says the record suggests, I believe, it appears, I guess I'm concerned that we're going to spend a lot of time on this. I mean, these allegations to me are really allegations on the integrity of a group of people who are trying to do the right thing at the right time. Yes, conversations take place out of the board meeting. If they didn't, governing wouldn't get done in America. I mean, these were attacks on the integrity of the superintendent, the business manager, the chair, the vice chair, and on the integrity of a professional transportation analyst, and frankly, on the work that he did, work that I have considered to be vital to our debate, because we have heard at, I think, every public meeting about that we've gone out and listened to, that transportation and the time kids are on buses is extremely important. And this is going after the integrity of that report. It's bad enough that this conspiracy theory and all of our emails and all of our texts and everything have been distributed widely to many others. We've hired a lawyer to look into this, found nothing. Every board member's had access to all of the information. And, you know, and the state level found nothing. You know, I just hope that this conversation can end soon and that we can move on. I appreciate the measured tones of my predecessors speaking. It's been a frustrating period. Thank you.
Thank you. Barb Wilson?
Thank you. You know, I too, you know, I am not looking at this as accusing anyone of doing wrongdoing. In fact, I know that there's just so much work to be done. And I, you know, want to give you a little bit of my perspective, having attended every single facilities meeting, as well as every single board meeting, and possibly I can identify some disconnect that might be useful. And my purpose in doing so is not to point fingers at any one individual, but that maybe we can grow from it and learn from it for future. So I think where part of the issue comes is when things happen and directions get set, when the discussion didn't occur in the facilities committee and then all of a sudden shows up at a board meeting. And I have listened to them and I participated in every single one. And even myself sometimes scratch my head, when did that happen? You know, because I attended the facilities meeting. I didn't hear that discussion. And I understand that there's discussion that happens behind the scenes as long as it's not a quorum, right? For particular board members. But I would like to just read a statement in the Secretary of State, a summary of the open meeting laws. And it basically says, in general, the law requires public bodies to you know, provide advance public notice of meetings, including meeting agendas, discuss all business, and take all actions in an open meeting unless an exception in statute applies. And that exception is related to when you go into, you know, executive session. So when I read the law, it talks, the intent of the law is for there to be transparency of that discussion. So when you sit in on a facilities committee meeting, you don't hear the discussion, and then you sit in on a board meeting, and then all of a sudden you learn, oh, for school. I mean, I'm thrilled with the 4-school model. Please don't think otherwise. Then you wonder, well, I just attended the last several facilities meetings and that never came up. So that then causes people to think that there isn't transparency, right? That simple kind of action. So also, you know, like, you know, I know both the chair, the vice chair, and the clerk are an executive committee, right? And so when two members get together, it is a quorum of that committee. So I then worry about that. I think the less that things are happening behind the scenes and not happening, you know, within the actual facilities meeting, the better. And I think that would help tremendously. Again, I'm not, you know, trying to point fingers at any individual. We're all, you know, I have a whole heck of a lot to learn. But I do take it very seriously. You know, when I read, when I sign an oath of office, you know, I've listened to almost every single of the webinars at the at the School Board Association, and really trying to see, well, am I wrong here? And that's not what I would hear in those trainings. So I think the disconnect is really having the public listen to the committee meeting and then not hearing discussion, and then later on at a board meeting basically saying, oh, we've decided to do this, or direct, the transportation study to go any particular direction. So for whatever it's worth, please don't take it the wrong way. I felt I had to speak as, because I take my position seriously, for whatever, folks want to listen. So thank you.
Thank you. Mary Heather?
Okay, thank you. I'll try to keep this brief. I guess I would say, and I don't have a totally prepared statement, but I do have some notes I just want to kind of go over. One, I think that the letter, sort of findings, Chris Kramer's findings from his public records request, in and of itself is a good reminder on the importance of professionalism and transparency in our board operations, and particularly around our facilities master planning process and other really important or controversial board actions. And I do think it is going to be important for the policy committee to look at how we respond to the system that we use for responding to incoming questions or complaints. I'm hearing that there have been folks who, didn't get a response right away, or, and I don't think we have a very clear system for that. And that's something that I think the communication committee and policy committees can work on, so that we have a system in place so that folks aren't just left hanging when they do raise an issue. Regarding specific accusations, my understanding is that there's a process at the state level for district employees, and that process has not yielded anything. Certainly our legal review from the board's perspective has not yielded any concerns. And to be frank, judging even just from the number of emails I received since our last board meeting, I'm not certain that an investigation and the findings of an investigation, if they didn't look a certain way, would necessarily satisfy Chris Kramer. And so I guess, that I, like Peter Conlon, have some reservations about spending a lot of time on something that I'm not sure we have, the meat there. But nonetheless, whether it's misconduct or perception of misconduct, they're equally problematic in a public decision-making process. And so whether or not we, go through and comb through our operations over the past 2 years of facility master planning or not, we do in fact have a community trust issue that we do need to work on. And it's an important issue. And some of these concerns with respect to communication and how the board is able to respond to concerns from the community, those are legitimate and valid points that we do need to work on. So I don't think that the board should be spending time on a big internal review. We have a COVID recovery plan that we need to work on. We need all hands on deck for that. We have vacancies to fill, and we do need to eventually resume this facilities master planning process to address the broader challenges that our board and our district face. And all of these are really student-centric needs, right? And that is, in fact, our mission is to support our students. I'm not certain that an internal review and spending time on that is really fulfilling that mission. But I do think that moving forward, this is a communications board operations manner, and or matter. And I think that moving forward, we do have some work to make sure that we engage the public in a meaningful way, and that we do respond to communications with appropriate systems, and that our actions and everything are as transparent as they can be, and professional. So while I don't agree that any wrongdoing has been done, the fact is there's a perception of it, and we have to deal with that perception. And I think the way we deal with that is really working on our policies and how we work together and communicate and engage the community moving forward. And it is an important thing to work on. The thing I just want to kind of end with is sort of what troubles me about this. You know, if this were a case study in community conflict, and this is a community conflict, I feel like we've reached this road where we're at a crossroads where, you know, problem solving and meaningful communication has kind of ceased, and interpersonal fights or accusations have kind of taken over. And, you know, I mentioned this, you know, when I was in public forums talking about my concern that the focus has been on people and positions instead of our problem and the interests that we need to focus on to work towards solutions to our problems. You know, I guess I want to say to everyone who's listening in on this, you know, our board members are people, our administrators are people. Many of us are parents who have kids in the schools. Many of us have we're parents who already put their kids through the schools. We are all neighbors. And so I feel like we need to engage like that. So I guess I would say, you know, moving forward, I think it's important for all of us to focus on the problems and the challenges at hand and look toward our interests, and you know, move forward in a problem-solving manner rather than you know, being stuck in our positions and not changing our positions. I think you know, we need to look at this as our solution really lies in the intersection of our interests. And I guess the way I look at it is it's a Venn diagram, and we're looking at that middle part where the intersection is, and it's student success. And I mean, collective student success, like Mary said, all ACSD students. And it is financial responsibility, it's equity, and it is also community values. And if we look at the Venn diagram of those four things, you know, we're trying to get to that solution that's in the middle. And I don't think that doing an internal investigation and spending a lot of time on these accusations is really doing the work that our students need us to do and our educators need us to do. And so that's what I would say. Thank you.
Thank you. Amy?
So I have a couple of thoughts. I hope they come out clearly. So first, and just thinking back to the actual board meeting where the transportation study was shared, and I distinctly remember the sort of the relief of like, oh, we can, this is really telling us the relief and the responding to the information that was being presented then, that was clearly illustrating that we were not going to meet our objectives and our promises basically to the public around keeping bus rides below an hour with the 3-school model. And I remember, I'm not even remembering with who, but I remember some little conversations both then and afterwards of sort of relief among other board members of like, oh, okay, four feels better. It feels better. And I mentioned this to say that in my mind, it was completely a response to the transportation study and our not being able to do what we were setting out to do with the information that we were being presented. So it is, and the other thing that this brings up, which is a reminder that this is a discussion. It's an ongoing discussion. And in fact, if anything, we are at fault because we're taking too long for a discussion. So it's leaving these gaps for people to assume that there's something happening in those gaps when there's not. That's what happens is in lack of information there you fill the void. So that I completely agree, Mary Heather, that we do have public trust issues, and we should look at how we can move forward. I'm really appreciating Amy's comments in opening the meeting about how to do that moving forward. It has disintegrated to where there's an accusation of ill will no matter what we do. And that's really unfortunate. Our committee is talking about ways that we can at least try to have different methods of communication that we hope would start to rebuild that trust. But it is two ways. I mean, some of the things in what we're being accused of are accusing us of decisions and actions, and there have been no actions and no decisions. So it's, as with many of the criticisms that we've gotten throughout this process, in some ways, people are criticizing us for a decision that we haven't even made yet, that we haven't even discussed yet. That is not a foregone conclusion, that there's still more conversation that's going to be happening. So, it's not decided that Bridport is going to be the school to close and Cornwall staying. We're not there yet. We suspended the process when that was the model that was put out there, but there's still so much more to do. So so I guess I just really wanted to make clear that when it's a long discussion and a long process, that inevitably these things are going to perhaps surface, but it does not make them true. And I'll stop there.
Thank you. Does any board member have a specific question that they would like to ask? Betty.
Hi. I guess I'd like to thank everyone who's commented and also, acknowledge Chris's courage for speaking up. I believe that even though we may not agree with some of the things he is bringing up, still I believe he deserves a level of respect, and not simply brush this off as a conspiracy or accusations. He went through the lengths of getting all these evidence and information, and through the process, a few things came up without finger pointing, without trying to make anyone feel like they're being pointed out. I guess my question is, I'm finding it a little difficult to reconcile the evidence that he found and the timing of how everything just played out. And also to just respectfully just figure out what, moving forward, if we can keep transparency as at the forefront of everything that we do, and professionalism, like Mary Heather was saying. I think it would really help us, all of us, the rest of the board members, feel like we are aware of whatever is going on at every stage of the planning process.
Betty, I want to make sure that we answer the question that you're posing, but I just need clarification on the specific question. Are you asking, just help me a little bit more with putting language to your question.
Okay, I guess what I was saying is based on on Chris's findings and his concerns, which, he went through the lengths of gathering all the, text messages, emails, and, this is not something that he necessarily made up. His concerns, I guess, in line with how the timing of the decisions that were made by the facilities committee and with the petition, and how all that came together, timing wise. It's hard for me to understand how the decisions, how the facilities committee came up with the decision to include Cornwall, or at that moment when all of that was going on in the background, whatever was happening, based on what he found. Are any of the members of the facilities committee willing to maybe talk a little about that? It's hard to ignore the evidence he found in line with the decision that was made. I guess that's what I'm saying.
I think I'll speak for myself. Being on the committee, I'm willing to answer any question with regards to ideas that he has presented. I'm not quite sure we'll probably agree on language here. I don't believe he has found evidence that yields a specific charge that he is making. I believe he has taken information that he has received and then made some hypothesis as to what that information means based upon his own interpretation. And while we are all able to do that, that doesn't mean that it's an accurate interpretation. An example, did I believe that when Cornwall was included to be considered for one of the schools, that the constituents of Weybridge might think differently about withdrawing from ACSD? I absolutely believe that. Absolutely. And probably said it to a myriad of people. That in no way was the reason why Cornwall was put into the mix. Those are two very different things. And so we're making assumptions of information that are inaccurate. And those assumptions are being made to support a theory that is also inaccurate. I personally heard through coach conversations and emails and feedback that what small schools were looking for was to make sure that they still had a small school option. That no matter what happened in this process of the facilities master plan, that they believed they could still get the type of education that they chose to receive by living in the place that they chose to live in. And so did I think that based upon the feedback that I'd received, that Weybridge felt as if they were being forced to go to Mary Hogan, and that's not where they chose to live, that was problematic? Yes, I believe that. And did I believe that providing them with another small school option would give them hope of staying in ACSD? Yes, I believe that to be true. And there is nothing nefarious or plotted with those beliefs. The key there is that there are assumptions that are being made that imply that such a statement meant that there was something going on behind the scenes, and that's simply not true. Any other questions on that?
Could we just chime? I think I'd like a chance to answer the question as well, if you wouldn't mind.
Sure.
As somebody who was not involved behind the scenes, except to pass along my offer to help in terms of some misinformation that the petitioner had put out. I came to the meeting at which the transportation study was presented because that's when the transportation study happened. And that's when we had the results from the transportation study. You know, for me, the transportation study was an important factor. It probably blunted or not blunted, but sort of removed the need for a further debate on 3 versus 4. That was simply a conversation that the board had not had yet, except earlier on in directing the facilities committee when COVID was hitting. We thought the economy was falling apart, that money was going to be tight, and we asked not only to, you know, early on looking at what system might work best for kids, but also at that point we were looking at how could we put all of these kids into the buildings that we have existing if that's what we have to do to save money. Fast forward to the transportation study coming out. It came out, it was presented at a board meeting, and to me, it obviated or got rid of the need to have a discussion of 4 versus 3, which we were going to have at some point anyway, because many of us were still not ready to say that we were for sure going forward with a 3-school model. I'll just reiterate what Amy said earlier, and that is that we haven't made any decisions yet. We have provided some guidance to the facilities committee. So I think a lot of what is going on here is coincidence of timing. Yes, there were petitions flying. There was lots of stuff going on, but the board was dealing with the information that the board had, and to sort of, I get bothered by this implication that somehow the board was swayed by just several people and what was going on in the background. The board is perfectly capable of looking at the information in front of it and making a strong decision as to what it wanted to do. And like I said, we were going to have a 4 versus 3 discussion at some point. And I think the transportation report sort of allowed us to move forward. Thanks.
Chip, then Lindsay.
I had, this has been a challenging conversation for sure. I sat on the facilities committee up till today, I guess. But never was I coerced as a board member or a facilities member. I did receive an email from the person in question who's requested a lot of this, referencing 2 statements that I made relative to first one, that I supported the 3-school model for the reasons both facility-wise and teaching, learning-wise. And then, my God, we got to the meeting with the transportation and the idea of this river that runs right through our district that makes a big difference, which I knew did, but yet it just became much more comforting trying to put all this together. Had I made a final decision? No, but I was quoted as saying I changed it. In that email also was this fact, again, coincidentally, that the superintendent had called me the morning of the meeting. I have no memory of that call. It could have been giving me the Zoom number. I have no idea. But the insinuation was that I better look at this because obviously I have been coerced somehow to change. He didn't say that, but that was the insinuation of the email. And for that reason, I needed to be on board to look into this much more critically. Well, I can tell you it didn't do that. It turned me the other direction, and that I just got furious. And I do have to suppress that a little bit But on that side of me, there was nothing nefarious. We had not made a decision. I have the right as a board member to change my opinion or to adjust it after I have different information. So that's where I stand.
Thank you. Lindsay?
Hello, can you hear me clearly? Sorry, I keep asking, but so there is a question sort of at the end, but I guess as I've listened to everybody talking, I guess a little bit of a statement has evolved in my mind that I wanted to share that, you know, Chris has put a lot of time and energy into this, and he, you know, it's clear that his energy is coming from, it seems to me it's coming from the right place. And when I look at it as an example of how important it is to respond to the public and to engage with the public, reciprocal communication. And, you know, I feel like that's work that's happening. I'm so new to this process, but, you know, one thing that I'm sitting here thinking is this is a bit intimidating, you know, as a new board member, this level of scrutiny. And when I, you know, wanting to be a board member, I'm looking to join a group of people that I feel have a very high level of integrity and intelligence, and I want to work with you all. And we're all, you know, volunteers and giving a lot of time and energy. And I would hope that people think that I have the best intentions, and that I think, you know, I can't help but think that you all have the best intentions. I mean, why would we waste our time? You know, if one of us has a conflict of interest where we own you know, we have a stake in, you know, the transportation company or something like that, you know, I think it would be a positive thing to be transparent about that type of thing. But geez, the level of scrutiny, you know, and it also concerns me, the use of resources, the amount of time that's been spent with this, and the amount of time we're devoting in this meeting. And I believe in transparency and integrity and honest communication. But I also, like, I'm here for the students and for our community. And I just hope that we can find a way to address public concerns and comments in a way that's not going to shift the focus away from the most important work that we need to do and the teamwork we need to use to, you know, all of our teamwork skills to come to some common ground here. You know, recording meetings, COVID has brought Zoom to us as a tool where we can now record meetings. And what kind of committee reports are we going to be sharing? How do we move forward from this? You know, I did hear people in the public asking about transportation long before the transportation study. So could we have done that? You know, the board, you know, had we or the board at the time responded differently in a different timeline, you know, how would it have evolved? But we can't go backwards. So I guess my question that I end with these thoughts is like, what good can come from this? What can we learn from this process? You know, what can we do so that we do feel connected to the public, and that when there is a comment that it's taken seriously, and that there isn't a perception of wrongdoing? Because I can't imagine anybody would want to put this amount of time and energy and, you know, putting ourselves out to the public with bad intentions, you know. And so, you know, I don't know. I appreciate the amount of time and energy, and I feel like this is something that we could really, what good can come of it? What can we do to move forward and, you know, learn from this, but to not get dragged down? Like, I don't know how much energy, how much money would it cost to do an investigation? And could that money and time be better spent? You know, do we have a way of just saying, these are some action items or some ideas we can use so that we can be even better and work better together? And, you know, so to build the public trust again. So I don't know that there's a succinct answer to that, but I think in the committees, we could probably all come up with some ideas for how to, you know, move forward in a positive way from this. And I don't know that, an investigation is, there's just so much to focus on. There's so many really, really important things to do right now. And I just don't know how this way, something like this could compromise and reprioritize things. So I guess I'll end it there. I don't want to take up too much time.
Great. Thank you, Lindsay. I'm going to call on a couple of folks who we haven't heard from yet, and then we'll get back to folks who have re-raised their hand. Mary G. Oh, I'm sorry. Go ahead.
I'm okay. Okay. I guess I want to say that the work that the board does in regard to policy, we did hear from a number of constituents, and Barb Wilson was one of them, who sent me some very helpful emails about public engagement. We have had those discussions in our policy meeting, and the decision at the time was we weren't going to make any specific decision, but we were going to explore different ways that other school boards do that. And we were also going to be asked to meet with the community engagement group so that we could come up with a combined idea. This was discussed with Mary Cullinay, and she agreed that this was one way to do that. But for the policy committee to just go out and make a policy didn't make any sense to us. We really felt like we needed more direction from the rest of the board. So it's not that we're not hearing that the public engagement or responding to public comment isn't important. We did hear that. It's just that we couldn't make a decision just like that. It's going to take some time to really explore the best way to do that. That's all I have to say.
Great. Thank you. Suzanne? You're on mute, Suzanne.
So I've been listening to what everyone has had to say. And, if I start back with the board meeting where we made the decision as a board to remove Bridport from the mix and to include Shoreham, that decision, and I believe that for me at least, was made strictly on the fact that people and the board, all of us, had said we wanted to keep transportation rides under an hour. That being said, we are building a puzzle without a picture. And so as we get information, we kind of connect it to the puzzle, but it's hard to see because it's a puzzle without a picture and no one has done this before. So one thing that I have suggested is that we start collecting the information we have and putting it in some sort of a diagram so we can see where we've made decisions and where they have moved us to. And then also the public can see that, we made decision A, and from there we went a point south and a point north or whatever, however it looks. But the decisions are being made based on information, and it's over a long period of time. So as someone else has said, as you lengthen the process and you make decisions based on new pieces of evidence or information, I should say, it's hard to remember where your last temporary decision point was. So, we needed to do just a better job of communicating and showing people where we are as we build this puzzle, that we work together to move the district forward. The policy committee, we've heard the comments. Mary said we've got 5 policies that are due to come to the board. Policy work is intense. It's difficult. You're not the most liked person in the world when you bring a policy forward at times. We've had discussions on the board where we didn't like certain policies that were brought forward, and then we found out that because of the way they were written, that we had no choice. We had to adopt them as they were presented because that's the way we were told to. I did some research for Mary. I found a policy on community relations and engagement from the Mount Aid Board, which I have sent Mary. I know that Barb Wilson sent us one. So those are in the hopper. You know, we can only tangle so much at once. And we only meet once a month. So that does slow the process down. But the last thing that I'd like to say is that as a community, we do have to remember we are volunteers. We get a very small stipend, maybe even. But the fact is that, you know, I ran for this board because I wanted to make a difference for the education of students within this district. It wasn't just for Bridgeport kids. It was for all students in this district. And the tone of some of the emails that I've been receiving that have been just directed just to me, I don't know if they're being privately blind copied to others, but at times have left me felt that I'm being harassed. And, you know, it hasn't made me feel good about being a board member. I've said that before, and I love this community that I live in and that I work in, and it is really hard to do this work when people don't trust you and they don't believe in you, and then they start, you know, questioning your integrity, and it's hard. I mean, we are making the best decisions that we can make as we move forwards. And I really want, what I want to come out of this is I want us as a board to become more transparent, to do a much better job at engaging and listening and understanding where our public is coming from, and trying to put that puzzle together in a manner that not only our public can make sense of it, but we can start to see where the holes are and where we might need more information. But I want us to move forward and start to heal. And yeah, I'll end there because this is just too difficult.
Thank you. We'll do Barb and Amy, and then in light of ensuring that we're having an effective process here from a time perspective, we'll hold these two as our final comments. Oh, sorry, Lorraine, we'll hold the last three as our final comments. Barb, we'll go to Amy, and then we'll finish off with Lorraine. Barb.
Thank you. Thank you. You know, I think sometimes as humans, we can get into trouble by assuming we know motives, and we may observe something and then we assume, oh, you know, they're doing this because of XYZ, right? So I would really like that part of it to be just set aside. I really do not believe that anyone here, you know, in question has ill motives, and I wouldn't even know what those would be to begin with, okay? I think that's important, right? And we've been focused on that. And what I really do want to remind us all of is that our meetings are recorded. And, you know, I've re-listened to the meetings, and I'm, you know, one to do that. Because I don't always remember what I thought I had heard, because it's been a period of time. And so in this particular case, what came out during the actual board meeting when the transportation study was happening, it was actually recorded that the transportation consultant didn't come up with the scenarios that he evaluated. They were provided to him. And then if you go back and look at the actual facilities meetings, those scenarios were never discussed, the 2 4-school scenarios. So I believe that is what caused all of this to happen. Had it been discussed in the facilities meeting and basically said, oh, you know, these are what we want to provide to the transportation consultant to do his initial assessment on, then we wouldn't be having this discussion today. But there was never, you know, because I was shocked when I was listening to that meeting, the readout. I'm like, oh my goodness, what did this happen? And of course, then you go back and you listen to the previous meetings and it wasn't there. So it's really, as I had read earlier, the Secretary of State in his guide to open meetings, it doesn't just state that it's decisions and actions that are taken. It basically says all business really needs to happen within the public. And I think as a board, if we keep that in mind and we use that as our kind of North Star, or as much as possible, that, you know, the committees that are charged to do the work, that you can see this traceability throughout, we wouldn't be here, and there wouldn't be any reason or for the, you know, the public to start to question, well, why did that happen? How come? So on and so forth. So just my 2 cents. I think, you know, I'm not, you know, I would never want to accuse anyone of what their motives are. That's, I, you know, have been misinterpreted many a times myself. So I really believe it's making sure that there's a track record of decisions, and you can see kind of the traceability, as Suzanne was speaking, would really help a lot here. And, you know, from a person that had been in the public looking in, that would have, you know, really helped me tremendously. I would have never even questioned how that decision was made. So for whatever it's worth, you know, that would be my recommendation, that we really need to be careful and make sure that we are really in an open meeting committee making decisions and, you know, or, you know, setting direction that the public sees, and not allow them to be confused or surprised. And because people, you know, we were watching, I'm sorry, we were all watching these meetings, like, you know, because we don't have anything better to do, right? So, but we all care. And, you know, so that's all I'm going to say. So thank you for listening.
Okay, thank you. Amy, and then Lorraine.
I'll be brief. But I did want to do a little foreshadowing since it's come up in this discussion, and it might be helpful for both our publics and our board members to know that. So the Communications and Engagement Committee met today to talk about some of these strategies of how do we be proactive in doing engagement when the public comment part of our meeting is so difficult, because with regard, in the context of even this discussion, points are raised about parts of our process that we haven't even gotten to yet. And yet we're not responding because that's the public comment section. So, and some may remember that we actually talked about, when we were still in the facilities master planning process, of adding a question and answer session to as different issues were going to come up. And then we suspended the process, but we are still talking about a recommendation that the executive committee find at least once a month, but ideally at every meeting, that there's what we didn't want to call it just question and answer, because it may not be, but that's different from public comment, where there is exchange, a public engagement section. And so this would enable this, not that this would have prevented this particular situation, but it would have been an instance where there might have been able to be dialogue to fill in this gap that we're now struggling to explain or understand. So and that's really one of the reasons behind that. And we can talk more in detail about this at a board report, which we hope to do today, but if we need to postpone, we can. And then the other is, again, likewise with the porch conversations, where that was really our way of trying to listen to communities. We didn't have a recommendation on that yet, but that's another way of engaging people. And yet what we would want to do this time is not have it all just be on Mary and Victoria, where they're getting all the heat. So we'll be talking about how to, a recommendation to come back with keeping something that's not our board meetings, but that is a form of exchange and listening. And then the third, and this gets back to one of the public comments around the emails, I think we're all like, and we keep visiting this every year. So what's our protocol for actually responding to emails? And so it's not all in the chair, and yet at the same time that we make sure that there's alignment and that there's one voice. So we have some thoughts about that we'll want to share too. But I have to say, with each of these conversations, it was, as a volunteer, I was feeling overwhelmed that, like, oh my gosh, how are we going to manage that when there is a lot of engagement, and it could easily get, we're going to have to talk about how to manage it in a way that we hope meets the citizens' standards. And that does feel a little overwhelming. So that's just all to say, it's sincere, and we're trying to get ahead of it so that we could prevent things like this moving forward. And we look forward to sharing all that and talking at more length. And I'll stop there.
Thanks, Amy. And then finally, Lorraine.
Yeah, I mean, I just feel like I need to say something since most everybody spoke. As I'm sure with all the board members, it concerns me greatly and makes me very sad that there seems to be so much distrust, not just for our board, but for our board leadership and for our administrative leadership. I mean, not just through Chris's letter, but even tonight, comments made from Ripton people about comments made by Peter with the AOE. I mean, it's just very concerning to me that there's just so much distrust. And I think part of the issue is going forward, if we could do this maybe in a little more holistic fashion, because I am one of the people, I mean, I expressed some concern at one of the meetings that Cornwall was suddenly in the mix and that Bridport was taken out. And it wasn't so much the 4-school versus a 3-school model, but that Cornwall was in both 4-school models. And I know it was supposedly because of the geography, but this is supposedly a 3-pronged approach. And it seems like we just keep doing it piecemeal. We look at the facilities and then we go on to the transportation. And my thought was, okay, geographically, Cornwall perhaps makes sense, but does it make sense with the facilities? Does it make sense with our socioeconomic? So I can understand why people are feeling unsure of our of the process, because even me, I'm going to be honest, when I got Chris's letter, it gave me pause because I already had concerns about suddenly the 4-school models were all Cornwall, and it did look a little suspicious to me, some of the things that Chris showed in these documents. Now, do I think anything unseemly was done? No, I don't. I don't think Peter, Victoria, Mary, anybody was trying to do anything behind the scenes to sway anything, but I do understand the process has been long and it has been disjointed, and I do see how that people can feel suspicious of what we're doing. And I also think Mary Heather mentioned the perception business, and I have been saying, in fact, I had it written down tonight in my notes, perception is reality, and the perception out there is that we're not being upfront, or we're trying to do things that are, you know, I don't know what, but it's whether it's true or not, and I don't believe it is true, it's concerning that people feel that way. And I think it's really important going forward that, as other people have said, that we do everything we can to be as transparent as possible. And I think part of that transparency is that we try to make this as holistic a process as possible and show as many scenarios as possible in the whole thing so people can understand why, okay, you know, that's why we picked Cornwall, that's why we picked Bridport, whatever, because, and I've said this before too, I'm not, you know, I'm never going to vote for something that I don't feel comfortable, that I've had all the information on why some schools should close and some schools shouldn't, because nobody wants their school to close, and we have to be able to tell people with facts why it makes sense, even though they may not like that answer. So, yeah, I mean, I'm concerned about the transparency thing, and I think it's really important that we redouble our efforts. I think everybody's tried, and I know that facilities committee has been a very tough committee, and we've never gone through this process before, and everybody's done the best they can. So I just think the whole board going forward has got to really do their best. And nobody, I mean, Chris obviously cares very much about what's happened. I mean, he's, you know, I give him credit for pursuing this because I'm sure it has been hard for him. So I don't think we need to have some outside people evaluate things, but I do think we really need to be cognizant going forward to try even harder to make things as transparent as we can.
Great, thank you. Are there any other comments on, or any other final issues with regards to this before we move on to the next agenda item? Chip?
At the last meeting, Barb Wilson made a motion, which we tabled, or at least we tabled that discussion. I just want to make sure we're, if we're going to end the discussion on this, are we ending it with the idea that from most of the board members' comments that a motion to pursue some sort of study would not carry? Is that correct?
That motion was tabled, so a new motion would have to be raised to untable it, and then that motion would have to be second, and then there would be a vote.
I know that, but if no motion is made, then that assumption is what I'm coming to, right?
Correct.
Okay.
We would need that to be remotioned. Suzanne?
So, one thing that I'm willing to suggest that we try is that at near the end of every board meeting that we do a public reflection on how we've done that evening as a board based on our policies. If we do a round robin of how we've interacted and how we feel we've done, then we're A, reflecting on our policies, B, thinking about how we've made our decisions and worked as a board. And if we, you know, to start off, to get used to the practice and to understand it, if we did it at each regular board meeting, not at committee meetings, but then eventually maybe it could even, you know, be moved so that it's not quite so frequent. But several boards use that method, and it's a way of just checking in with your fellow board members, with your policies, and just saying, you know, we're working on getting better. So it's just a suggestion.
And I'd like to table that for the retreat then. We'll make sure that that's on the agenda item to talk about that from a process perspective. All right, so unless I hear any other motions, we're going to move on to the next agenda item. Great. Thank you all for that discussion. I appreciate it greatly. The next agenda item. Shockingly, my board pack logged out due to inactivity, so I'm just bringing that back up. Next agenda item, I believe, is the response to the state board with regards to the Ripton secession process. And at this point, I'm just going to ask Peter B. to introduce a little bit how we got to where we are with regards to specifically his comments that were shared in the Addy Indy, as well as kind of just in general where we are in that process. Peter. Peter, you're on mute. Now you're on.
Gosh. You'd think I would get that by now, but
Right.
Alas. So the next phase in the Ripton secession is the state board is now involved, and this is something that we shared in the legal brief that was part of the Ripton secession facts, and it talked about the different steps, that this is the next step if all 6 towns approved of Ripton leaving. The state board, there are a number of different pieces involved in this process that the state board will engage. Interestingly, none of the work they did in Act 46 informing groups necessarily pertains to them withdrawing. And I think anyone who read the Addison Independent article saw that that was something that John Carroll, the chair of the state board, pointed out, that there's a disconnect right now between the vision of Act 46 and the incredible amount of work that the state did and the money that the state spent in both moving for voluntary unification and mandatory mergers as well. That the withdrawal doesn't have that. He mentioned in that little piece in the Independent that he had contacted legislators to let them know, hey, this is I think he used the term low bar in terms of withdrawal that was not matched at all with Act 46. So the state board doesn't look at the withdrawal and say, does this make sense or not? It doesn't apply that any of that. What the state board does is it looks at pretty much 2 things. One, it determines if the current district that the district is leaving from. So it looks at ACSD and says, can ACSD continue to exist? Obviously it can, it's big enough. So no one has any kind of question about that. That's not something that they're going to spend time on. It makes sure that the financial obligations are met from the town withdrawing. So there has to be an agreement between the two, between ACSD and Ripton in terms of what debt Ripton might owe or carry back that ACSD took on when we unified. So that's a process that will happen. There is some question about who the legal entity of Ripton is right now, because there is no school board yet. Ripton does have an executive committee of citizens that have been appointed by the select board, but there is no formal governing body yet for the district. So I think that's something that will be worked on in the weeks ahead to figure out kind of what that means with questions like the financial obligations. The other thing the state board will do is assign Ripton to a supervisory union. And the board has the option to do 2 different things. One, it can turn ACSD, it can turn the district back into a supervisory union structure, which is what we left when we unified. Or it can assign Ripton to an adjoining supervisory union. So those are the 2 things that the state board can do. We knew this kind of going into this process. We knew this when we got that legal brief to know what the process would be. We knew that we would come to this point at some time. So in terms of, and Barb, do you have a question about that before I continue?
Yeah. With the supervisory union, though, if it turned ACSD into the SU again, what that means, I believe, the way I've interpreted emails from Donna Ravage from the past.
Russo Savage.
Yeah, Russo Savage.
Yep.
Is that the ACSD would still be a district. Ripton would be a district. And then there would be an umbrella over top of them that's the supervisory union. I don't believe it would be dismantling ACSD. That is at least how I've interpreted it when I've had dialogue with her and received emails from her.
No, it's correct that ACSD would still exist, but it would, what I was trying to say is it would change ACSD and the role that ACSD and the board has in terms of some of the functions of ACSD. So it is a pretty significant governance change for ACSD. And if you look at, I think it's 16 VSA Chapter 7, which is the supervisory union statute, you can read through there and see what a supervisory union is charged with. So one of the big changes that would happen, or a couple big changes that would happen, one would be the supervisory union would drive curriculum. So that has the responsibility to create curriculum. So instead of this board determining that, this board would be receiving that from the supervisory union. Also, the makeup of that supervisory union board, as it's laid out in statute, has 3 members, and of course this could be negotiated given the different sizes between the districts, but 3 members from each board would make up the supervisory union board. So you would have, you know, three members from ACSD and 3 members from the Ripton board of probably 5 on this supervisory union board. So that's just another change, just in terms of the functions of what the board does, what the ACSD board does versus what the supervisory union board does. It's more complicated than ACSD continuing to provide services to Ripton. Which is why, you know, and again, this is my opinion, and it's also my sense from talking to people that I think supported Ripton leaving. You all remember, I put a piece in the as an independent before Ripton's initial vote saying that I thought we were stronger together. Tracy Harrington did, the principal of Ripton as well. This board talked about it and came to the same conclusion. Again, this is in what, early January, I think. After that vote, you know, the board talked about the withdrawal. Ripton was pretty clear that it wanted to withdraw. So, you know, I think people felt like, and I think, as I mentioned in my statement in the Independent, I think all of our towns said yes, like we support Ripton's agency to want to do what's right for its students. I don't think, and this was mentioned in the public comment earlier that Lorraine referenced, I don't, my own belief, again, mine, I don't believe that when people were voting to say let Ripton go, that they were thinking this was also going to revert ACSD into a supervisory union structure and create what I think will be looking ahead. I'm looking ahead to a time when, you know, all of us might be doing different things, but just looking at the health and wellness of this organization, what I think we have been able to achieve as a single district, as a supervisory union, it's a lot more challenging. It takes a lot more time to run a supervisory union. It's more tending to things instead of having a single vision. Again, it's what kind of, we could go back 5 years from today and look at all of the work that we did to form into a single union, and everyone here who was part of that remembers kind of all the conversation we had around why this was important and why it would help us to focus more on students and student achievement and less on operations and management. Having been a superintendent of a supervisory union and now a single district, it's a very different experience. Just in terms of the kind of time that I feel like I can lead in focusing on what I think is important. So that's where my comment came. The board may feel differently, but I did feel like it was important share from my seat what my experience has been and what I think is best for ACSD.
Before we start to have this conversation, which is another significant conversation for the board, there's already been language that has been shared that Peter's sentiments are politically charged or they're political in nature, and that we need to do what's best for kids. Therefore, what Peter is saying must not be what's best for kids. It must be politically charged. I'd like for us all to start this discussion based from an understanding and belief that our comments and our intentions moving forward are all fueled by what's best for kids. We might disagree, we might not understand, we might have questions, but let's not start off this discussion already with accusations of misintent or political upside or whatever we're worried about. And take Peter and take all of our comments moving forward with an understanding and belief that they are being said with the intention of what's best for kids. Peter C.
Just to focus the conversation, are we discussing the board coming out with a statement, or what's kind of the end point of what we're doing here?
So we have a couple of things, moving forward. We have to start planning and taking part in this process. And as such, we will be asked as a board and as a district to contribute testimony and statements and directive with regards to what we think and what our desires are as we move forward. Again, there are going to be many perspectives that are shared, and we're going to be asked for ours. And so we're starting this process of trying to figure out what that perspective is. I also think we're going to have to, as we start to move forward, working with the state and providing them the type of information that they need and the process of that and all the questions that are going to get answered, getting the board's feedback on whether or not they will see this as one of the actions that Peter and I as chair will do and then report back to the board. And as we have said in the past, I can't do that unless the board charges me to do it. And so we're being asked to make that determination as we start to plan this process, to recognize that as a role of the chair. So those are the two things I think that we're trying to work through. Peter, did I miss anything?
I don't think so.
Mary Heather.
Just to sort of further frame this, do we have an idea of the sort of timeline that we're working with on this process?
What we know thus far is the initial state board perspective, and again, I think this could change as things come up, would be April, I think it's the 21st is when the state board would hear from, again, as Mary said, from everybody, from anyone that wants to come forward to share, and then make a determination in May at their May meeting. I can't remember the exact day. Is it May 23rd? They meet anyway. It's.
Yeah, I thought it was the 23rd.
May 19th, but sorry for the interruption.
Oh, 19th.
Thank you.
And then Barb.
Your comment about political is well taken. However, the comments that we've received either by letter or by testimony or in public forum tonight makes it sound pretty simple for Ripton. We'll just buy the services from ACSD. And it doesn't really at all reflect the absolute complexity of this and the really absolute change in what our governance would be. Number one, I don't know how it could be equitable that you would have a board making all these decisions that's representing a town like Ripton versus a town with 6 towns. I don't know how you do that unless there's something in the statute that tells you differently. To me, to say that isn't a political decision, well, of course it is. So I'm not, I don't know how you can say it isn't political. The fact is, this would make a huge change in our district, period. All for the worst. And I do not believe for a minute that all the people that voted substantially to allow Ripton to leave in every town had any concept that this was the possibility. Nor did we, really. I mean, I just never even envisioned that they would assign us and thus we'd have to change our whole thing. I worried about it, but I just couldn't believe it. But, I think this is really, talk about our last decisions or last discussions we had. This one is even bigger. This is everything. We vote to do it a certain way. This is going to make a difference, and they follow our direction. This makes a difference for this district forever, like Peter Burrows said. So you got to be really careful on this.
Yeah, just a couple questions. First, do we know of any examples where this is actually taken place? Where, I mean, you have an existing unified district that has another town that's asked to be part of a supervisory union, that we could then look at their structure. That's question one. And question two, I would love to know kind of more detail. I'm sorry, I'm a details person, around what the complexity really would be and the cost would be. And I'm always been a person of thinking about in the past and then going forward, what can we do, right? Is there a creative way that we could form a supervisory union that provided the ability to, receive money and charge for services? Maybe it's not possible, but I'm just not feeling I have enough knowledge right now to know. What that would even entail and how difficult it would be. And part of that could be my problem because I'm new to this. Thank you.
You're welcome. Lorraine?
I just wanted to agree wholeheartedly with Chip's comments. I voted to let Ripton go, and I know that in the scenarios, they talked about they would be assigned to somebody, and possibly us, probably us. But until Peter started talking about the whole thing with the supervisory union board, and I served on the supervisory union board for most of the time I was on school boards in the county here, so I had not really given that thought until Peter just brought that up. And I'm sure that the voting public did not think about that. And I agree that that's a very serious thing to be taking into account. And and our first responsibility, or my first responsibility, I feel like as a school board member of the Addison Central School District, is for our children and our district. And not that I don't care about the Ripton children, but they're leaving, and that's not, no offense to Ripton, but my focus is on what's best for our district and our kids. And I don't think that would be in our best interest. So that's all I guess I have to say.
Jen?
The one piece that keeps coming back in my mind, that is the most concerning, in addition to what's been said, is the types of services that we would be asked to provide. I believe, and correct me if I'm wrong, are the types of services that we're saying within our current structure we're not providing well at this point. And I believe Tracy Harrington spoke best about this when she offered some examples of why she feels that Ripton would be stronger with ACSD, and that she actually supported some forms of consolidation because it's difficult to retain and attract the specialists that are needed and at the distance to provide those services in an appropriate way. They're following the law, of course, but it's not the ideal situation. And I feel like if we were assigned to continue to provide those types of services as sort of an add-on, it would be even more challenging for us to be able to meet the needs of the Ripton students as well as the students that are in the ACSD.
Thank you. Amy?
Yeah, I just want to say two things. One, having served on the various boards back when we were a supervisory union, and to think about going back there, back in that direction, it's a huge step backwards. And I know from the people I was talking to that was not what they were thinking about or supporting. I will also say that from the folks I was engaging with up in Ripton back, even when for the January vote, that the model that was being talked about more was being assigned to another supervisory union. The public information sessions, those were the questions, and it didn't preclude them being assigned to and changing the ACSD, but it was being offered as the most likely scenario to be assigned to a supervisory union over the mountain. So I do think it would be a surprise. I know we're seeing in some of the chat that for some it's not, but I think even so, the point is there's confusion, and voters. This part of the conversation was not part of the conversation when citizens of the other 6 towns were voting to let Ripton go. But and more to the concern of this board, I just can't see it being a constructive step forward after all that the towns have been through to get us to this point, and to have one board that's working on one vision moving forward. And some may disagree with me, but having served on those boards, and particularly the supervisory union board, it's really complicated. It's really hard to get it to be functional. I just can't see it being a constructive way. I can't see it being something we would want to recommend. I'll put it that way.
Suzanne and Mary G. Suzanne, you're on mute.
You'd think after a year, I'd remember this. Everyone that I spoke with, as they asked me about the Ripton vote, and, their questions were, what does this do to my taxes? So it wasn't, anything about governance or anything like that. They were just like, so what does it do? Will this affect my taxes? And those were their questions. And they said, if it's not really going to affect my taxes and they really don't want to be a part of us, this is what they were saying to me, then why don't we just let them go? I do know that, before the second vote, I started looking into some of the options that were out there that were being passed around. And I do have to say that the thought of going back to a supervisory union where we came from was just, I read it I've still continue to read it. I read it again today after some emails, and just trying to figure out how that would work, what it would look like, how we would make decisions, how it would work in the best interest of students. I'm just still struggling with that, but like I keep saying, I was elected to the ACSD board to represent all students in the district, and whatever decision we make has to be to support those students that are in the district.
Mary G, then Victoria.
I have a question about if they were reassigned to another supervisory union. Would the family still have the option of tuitioning their students into the middle school and, I mean, Middlebury Union Middle School and Middlebury High School? Or would they have to then send their students to the other supervisory union?
So that was a question I think we had at the very beginning, wondering about that, but they would have the option, unless they established an agreement with another district to designate a certain middle school and high school. So that's one of the things that the new board could do is designate, any school they want. They can make an agreement as a board with another district to say, we will send your kids in the same way that Goshen is sending kids to Neshobe. They have an agreement to send them there. They would have choice, so they would be able to choose to send them here.
Okay. So if we opted not to, or made the suggestion we did not want to form a whole new supervisory union, it doesn't mean we can't welcome them in as
Right.
students at middle school and high school. Okay.
Victoria?
Yeah, generally I agree with what, oops, sorry. I agree with what everybody said, that the structure, the governance structure as Peter described would not be something I would vote for, but I agree with Barb that, if this has never been done before, what are the other options? Could we say to the state board, we'll do this, but we're not, we'll just be a supervisory union with two boards, a Ripton School Board and an ACSD board, and not have an overarching board that shares, though, because it's such a tiny union. Why would we need an overarching? Do you think that we have the flexibility, or that they would have the flexibility to try to think of something new that would sort of
I think
answer to both sides?
You would have to write new statute, I would believe, because currently they have to be assigned to a supervisory union. So what you're talking about is, kind of contracting services, ACSD being somewhat of a contractor and just billing for a service, as opposed to, with the supervisory union structure, there's a whole fiscal model that has to be built. So that,
right.
So I don't know of any way currently with statute to be able to have Ripton not belong to a supervisory union. Peter might have insight too.
It just seems, since it's never been done before, that maybe there's room for something new. Just a question.
Here's Steve.
Thanks. I'll try to answer some of those questions and then make my comment. It would be foolish not to be in an SU for any community, because one of the things an SU does is it socializes your higher costs, those being especially special education. The way the law works today is that, if those of you who are old enough to remember the old days of when that family moved to town and all of a sudden your taxes went up. Well, that went away, thank God. And so now special education costs are essentially socialized across the district. So there's no longer that town identification, but more importantly, not that town absorbing solely that cost. So it would frankly be foolish not to be in a supervisory union for an independent district, because that would be a significant financial risk. I think Peter's correct. This is all governed by state statute. It would require a change in the law. I've personally thought a lot about this. This is I think a very challenging topic. And I sort of play the scenario out. If we had to become an SU and basically have two separate boards and a district here and then the big district over here. But what it essentially says is that, anytime a town sort of says, well, I don't like what the district's doing, there can be a petition effort and they can drop out. The discussion over school consolidation is not going to go away. And so, really it becomes essentially, you could almost see us reverting back to an SU where every school's got its own district, its own school board, and right back to where we were, because the town may not like what the board is doing. Now, fortunately, what has really happened is that towns have spoken. But that doesn't mean that would hold, and doesn't mean that the union would hold. And I really fear of a slow reversion back to the way we were, which I feel does affect education. I feel does affect the education of kids. I think you start losing quality people under that scenario. I think you lose quality leadership. I think it does not work well. And when I think about the ability of this board, back when we first introduced the concept of IB, and the ability to sort of implement that in a, not just a fast way, but in a way that was not confusing, it was straightforward, because we were one governance model, versus how that would have had to have been done in a supervisory union. I don't think it ever would have happened. So my concern is a little more long-term. I think that it could really, things could fall apart. The folks in the other towns have made the very hard decision to say, we are staying. We know what it might mean. I look at the vote in Weybridge, and those folks voted to stay with us, even though they were looking at the cards on the table that said our town could be one that closes. And I think that we need to honor that decision as well. Thanks.
Hey, Heather.
Thanks. Yeah, I guess I have a couple things that kind of come to mind. One is I do appreciate Jen's comment about just the efficacy of providing special education services to a school that small, when we already have challenges with that in our current configuration. And I do feel, it's kind of right there in our policy that as a board, we are obligated to protect the integrity of the district and act in the best interest of stakeholders within our district and the communities who've chosen to be in the district. And I really am uncertain about how a complete revamping of the governance structure would in fact be in the best interest of the district and its stakeholders. And so I just can sort of right there conceptually have difficulty with that. I'm comforted by the possibility that if Ripton students or if Ripton's district is assigned to a different supervisory union, that it doesn't preclude those students from coming to MUMS and MUHS. I do have concerns about what it would look like on the ground if any of those students require special services like special ed. I would presume the other supervisory union would be financially obligated to provide those services, and I don't know what that would look like. It seems like a complex thing that as a parent of someone who receives special education services, I would feel bad for a Ripton family who's looking at that. But I am, again, comforted by the fact that even if we decide, no, this isn't in the best interest of our district, that doesn't mean we're shutting the door on Ripton students coming to our secondary schools. So that's very important to me. But But I do also want to say, just on principle, I really do agree with Peter Conlon's point about the broader issue in that this discussion almost amounts to sort of a loophole for communities who are unhappy with kind of the direction the district board is working, or what's being asked of them to solve a larger problem, and that in some ways, what they're asking is that they still enjoy the full benefits of being part of the district while not being expected to take on the responsibilities of being part of the district. And just on principle, I have trouble with that. And I guess I don't feel that's fair to the other member towns, particularly those who struggle with the same challenges that Ripton faces. So yeah, I guess I just have a problem with it on principle. Thank you.
Final comments. Thank you. So what I hear coming from board members, number one, is obviously there is a lot of unknowns, and we need to work hard over the next few weeks to gather, solidify that information in a way that we're all comfortable in understanding the consequences of any decision or any way this goes, and being able to bring some specificity and color to that so that we can understand it and our community at large can understand it as well. And so I think one of the first things that we'll need to work through is putting that information together in a way that we can consume it and understand it. And then I also feel like I'm hearing that while we will continue to wait for that information, based upon what we know right now, it seems that we all have significant, well, not all, that there is significant concern about what it would mean for us to go back to an SU and the impact that that would have on our district as ACSD. Are people comfortable with that statement? Great. And so I guess the next thing then is, are folks comfortable with Peter and I working with the state to start pulling this process together, getting that information together, sharing it back with the board as we meet those milestones and get us through that? Is that something that you see being done by Peter and I? If you could raise your hand. Oh, I think I need a motion for that, actually. Could I get a motion to provide the chair with direction to support Peter and the state in moving forward on solidifying and understanding the plans for secession and impact to ACSD?
I'll first.
Chip, and then Mary
Second.
Mary second. Any discussion? Lindsay, discussion?
What would the other option be? For a committee to take that work on? Or
another
for
individual?
The full board, or I'm sorry, what'd you say?
It would be another individual.
So there's some maximum number of people who can take on that role?
Right now, what they're asking for is for a designation from the board and to work with Peter. There will be, as we go through this process, a whole host of opportunity for other folks to contribute and to get involved. But at this point, they are asking for one representative from the board.
So how does this process work with just like nuts and bolts? If there are other board members who would really like to have that role, is it like when you elect the officers, or how does, I'm not one of them, but if there are other people sitting on a desire to represent the board in this role, how does that work?
Usually the chair, the lucky chair, is identified as the individual who takes on that representation role. But that process has to be formalized. So the board in this instance has to formalize that the chair gets the opportunity to do that.
Okay.
So Lindsay, it's similar to like when we make a public statement or something, we authorize Mary to speak on behalf of us. So
Okay.
in this situation, we would be authorizing her to engage with Peter and the state to gather information.
Okay.
Right, there'll be no decision making. She'll bring that back if if there needs to be a motion for us to vote on, it will come back and discussion will prevail.
And is it usually the chair, or, because it seems like there are people on the board that have like specific areas of specialization where they have a lot of like resources to bring, and I'm still learning what those are, but do we sort of shift who's designated for different tasks depending on areas of specialization?
It's usually the task. So from a specialization perspective, that would usually fall to work at the committee level. These types of things happen very rarely, where there's, you know, a specific request of someone, of the chair to receive this request for extra work. You know, this will be the first time in the 3 years that I've been involved that this specific request has been made.
Okay, thank you.
No worries. Chip?
Just clarification, Peter Burrows, relative to the testimony, because what we're really putting together is data that the board will then give to Mary as our representative, if that's the case, who would then be one of the people who would testify. Is that true?
Yeah.
At the state board meeting.
Yeah.
So it was mentioned that there were other people who would testify. Who else other than Ripton and us would testify?
I believe it would be open to other public comment. So, you know, they would definitely obviously want to hear from ACSD and from Ripton. You know, and I think their hope as the, you know, there's not a lot of precedent, right? There was the one unification that happened down south, Halifax, a totally different situation. Both of those sides wanted to separate and went to the board, and it was a pretty quick process. I mentioned earlier, we don't yet know what the, you know, kind of like the formal school board of Ripton doesn't yet exist. So
I know, but that's part of my question is if in fact we have one voice made up of Mary testimony and Ripton has 50 voices because they aren't already organized. I'm not saying they do, but I'm just saying if that is the case, then that seems to be a rather distorted type of hearing situation, even if they're saying the same thing.
what I was I didn't finish my thought, but what I was gonna say is, I think the state board would prefer if this came forward to them with a conclusion already done, that, you know, everybody would agree that this one solution makes the most sense. We don't know yet, you know, exactly the official, you know, we've heard from some Ripton, some folks that are on that executive committee, but we haven't received anything formal yet. So I think there is more work to be done to have conversation. And, you know, as I mentioned earlier, I don't know in terms of what the state board is going to decide, because the one that happened, the Halifax separation, I believe had 2 school boards that were already formed that were then separating. This is a totally separate situation. So I think they're going to run into this reality of not having the formal school board yet as part of this process. So I think Mary mentioned lots of unknowns. There are lots of unknowns that we're going to have to figure out as we go forward. And it's, you know, April 21st is not far away.
Yeah.
Jen? And then Victoria?
I'm feeling like I missed something along the way. I feel like, is there a document or something that you're all referring to that I don't know about or that I missed in an email someplace?
There's, when we were putting information together for the community on secession, there's a legal document that we linked in that information. And that legal document states the process that also many people in our community have written Donna Russo Savage. I've been copied on emails back when she sends a reply back, she copies me, which is great for me to be kind of like in the know in terms of the information that's being shared in the community. So she's also shared that information with lots of people, relative to what the state board's role is. So that's,
Nothing official other than what you've already put online. It's just there's other communications happening that maybe some people know about. I'm just feeling like I do not know everything that is going on right now that other people seem to know. Like, I don't know about testifying or whatever is going on.
Well, that just came up. We all are just finding out about that. So we knew that the state board was going to tackle this. We knew there was a 30-day waiting period. And so we're just finding out the April 21st date. That's what I was saying. It's a super fast turnaround to be able to kind of both work this out together with Ripton and go forward to the state board to testify.
Okay, thanks.
Yeah, so you're not missing anything. It's just really fast.
Here's Dave.
Just a couple things. First of all, for those of you who don't know, Donna Russo Savage is the attorney with the Agency of Education who handles all Act 46 and unification type matters. So I just sort of process and kind of wanting to wrap up for the night because it's getting kind of late. Eventually, what we're going to need to present, is it fair to say, is a statement to the State Board of Education as to where the ACSD board stands. Is that?
Yes.
Is that to me or to?
Whoever wants to.
Okay.
And so I guess, and we have a meeting before the state board meeting. And so I think that it seems like we're not going to wordsmith a statement tonight.
No.
But that we need to be ready to have one to approve, I imagine, at our next board meeting.
Right, and that statement needs to be fueled by our understanding of the issue, which means that additional information has to be collected.
Yeah, great, thank you.
Great, Lindsay, and then I think we're going to try to take action on the second motion that was, or the second to the motion that was levied. Yes.
So I've seen this likened to an amicable divorce in a way. And I'm just curious, have there been conversations where ACSD is talking with the town of Ripton, if we were to create a parallel of like a mediator, has a 5-school model been brought up again at any point? Have we tried to go back to the table as one would in an amicable divorce and say, hey, I don't know. I'm just curious because I haven't, is that even an option at this point? If the town of Ripton were to decide, or has the vote of all the towns sealed the deal and we're moving forward, and it's simply a question of whether they're going to be, in some way interacting with ACSD or a different SU?
I think it's, my sense of the statute is this is, unless we started all over again, and there would need to be a vote to bring Ripton back at this point, I would think.
Yeah. It's too far. It's farther along than that in a legal sense, that the next step is there. That's the next step. That's the only next step, is whether, those two options, that ACSD or another SU.
Right. I think a legal option, I mean, if there was a desire to revert back, I think the next step is they're assigned to an SU, and then they could petition to join ACSD later on. and ACSD would have to vote then to bring Ripton back. I think is how it would work. Just
It
kind
would
of
be
like
just their town.
reverse.
If they're presented with, you will, by the the education, this is the SU that you're going to be assigned to. In theory, they could say, we don't really like that one. Can we go back? Like, I just want to understand this because it seems really important.
Yeah,
I can ask you guys,
we need to ask legal counsel that question.
Okay.
I'm not sure.
Okay.
Okay, Lorraine, and then we got to keep these last two kind of short, folks, so that we can take action on this. Lorraine and then Barbara, and then we're going to take action.
Yeah, I'm sorry, and this is really quick. Peter, if, are there any, I'm assuming they would be assigned to a somewhat local district. Are there SUs still around that would meet that? Because like, what if there's another, the nearest ones are all supervisory districts as opposed to supervisory unions. What if they all said, we don't want that structure anymore either? I mean, are there still ones around that might qualify, or?
So I don't think the state board would assign a withdrawing district to another district and force it into an SU. That seems really unfair.
Right, I agree.
So the two adjoining SUs are White River and Rutland Northeast.
Okay, so Rutland Northeast wouldn't be, okay, that might be a logical thing. Okay, yeah, I just was trying to wonder. Thank you. Sorry to.
And then we're going to take action and wrap this one up.
Yeah, and this will be really quick. Will there be any dialogues with Ripton throughout this where you sit down and try to brainstorm what could happen? Or is it pretty much, we work on what we think and they're working on what they think, and you present it to as testimony?
I think the more that we can continue talking about it, and that the problem is there aren't creative solutions here. There are two outcomes, right? So it's again, I don't know in terms of a formal position. This is the first time the board has talked about it. When John Flowers reached out to Mary, she didn't have a comment because she wanted to bring it to the board. I shared my belief about it. So I think alternatively on the Ripton side, I've had one conversation with some of the members of their assigned executive committee, but I think a follow-up conversation makes sense. And that's what we talked about when we talked, let's kind of keep talking and see if we can figure this out. So that's certainly the intention.
Thank you.
Yep.
Okay, so we have a motion and a second, and we've had discussion. All those in favor, Barb, could you put your hand down just so I can see that this is a new hand going up? Great, thanks. So if all those in favor of the motion, raise your hand for aye. Any opposed? Great. So moved. Barb, I saw your hand up for aye. It stayed up there for no, you're on aye. Okay, great. Just want to make sure for the record we have that.
Sorry about that. I got really confused.
No worries,
was I
all
supposed to
good.
raise my hands?
There's hands, there's Zoom hands. Everybody's got a lot.
But then there's the double negative of a hand, and then a Zoom hand is a negative.
I was baffled.
All good. Okay, is there anything in the other category for other? Super. Oh, Jen, you got another. Go right ahead.
Super short.
No worries. All good.
I just want to let you know, I've sort of fine-tuned the letter that I shared with you all regarding the teacher pension. I will share it again one more time, and I will officially ask if you want to be added to the letter. If you do not, that is totally fine. I will send a letter from Jen Newceder to President Biden and down. If you want to be included on it, and if I hear back from everybody on the board, I can let you all know that this was from everybody on the board, or 3 people or 2 people. I just want to make sure that you're okay with that happening, either from Jen Newseder alone or inviting others to join in.
Great, so you're gonna send, just so you're gonna send out what you've written to folks, and if you want to add on your name, it would be from Jen Newseder and Linda someone, and that would, how it would be reflected. It would not be reflected as this was who from ACSD, who from the board is approving this.
It's not an official ACSD board letter unless you all decided, as you wrote back to me saying, yes, I fully support this and I think the board should send it. And if everybody says that, then I'll bring it back one more time. But otherwise, it is individuals who happen to be board members who heard this concern and are voicing their concern beyond.
Great. And as long as, I mean, I'd be comfortable, and again, I'm speaking for myself here, is that if someone wasn't to sign on, it's not sending the message that they're not in, that it shouldn't send a message if they don't sign on, is my point.
Nope, no pressure. And maybe they don't feel like this is the right time or the right tone or whatever, because we're not making an official board motion. But if somebody felt like they wanted to share some support at this time, this is an opportunity to do that.
Great, sounds good. Anything else in that? Yes, Barb.
Sorry. So I'm wondering, and I don't know what the letter currently has in it. Are we encouraging at all, or does your letter, I should say, encourage that possibly some of the stimulus money?
Because of the late hour, you guys
Yeah.
could have a conversation about the letter
Yeah, I think,
separately.
why don't we
Okay.
get the letter out separately, and then if there's any questions, we can do that.
Basically, what it boils down to, citizen Jen Newseder has a letter she wants to sign and is inviting anybody else who wants to join to sign with her.
All right, so with that, could I get a motion then to adjourn? Suzanne? Wonderful. Mary, second. Thank you all very, very much for a great conversation this evening, and see you all soon.
Thanks, Mary.
Thanks, everyone.